It is 3 a.m. in the east, midnight out west from the Fox News World headquarters in New York. Good morning, everybody. I'm Uma Pemmaraju. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been quite a night. Still no final answers yet. Let's go to Carl Cameron, who's standing by in Boston from Senator Kerry's headquarters. Carl, can you tell us?
Well, thanks very much, Uma. And while we may not have final answers, we have something quite close to it. Moments ago, Senator John Edwards, the Democratic running mate, came out to the stage here in Copley Square, downtown Boston, the rally site that is not a victory or a concession speech location this evening. Senator Edwards saying that the Kerry-Edwards campaign owes it to the American people. Indeed, the people of the country deserve to have every vote counted, and he was speaking specifically about the state of Ohio. Senator Edwards made it clear that they will continue to wait until every last vote is counted, but statistically it is an open question as to whether or not Kerry can pull it out. All of the networks, including Fox News, now having called Ohio for Senator Kerry, for President Bush, excuse me, and mathematically it seems like it may indeed be an insurmountable advantage for the president, notwithstanding the Kerry campaign's hope that there could still be some additional provisional ballots and overseas ballots, absentees, etc., that could tip the scales. That seems unlikely. This was a day that began with exit poll information leaking as soon as 1 o'clock this afternoon on the internet, and across the country amongst the political insiders, a surge of enthusiasm for Senator Kerry. And for much of the day, it was believed, based upon exit poll information and other sort of anecdotal data, that both Florida and Ohio were trending for Senator Kerry, and he was on his way to perhaps winning with as many as 300 electoral college votes. It turns out that the only state Senator Kerry appears to have actually swapped is the formerly red state of New Hampshire, now a blue state, Senator Kerry having beaten George W. Bush there in the Granite State, a state that was won by George W. Bush 4 years ago. As it stands, there still remain some uncalled states, but it is at this point, with the president at 269 electoral college votes, he is guaranteed at the very least a tie. Should there be a tie in the electoral college, it's decided in the U.S. House of Representatives, where there is a Republican majority that tonight has grown by at least one seat. That in itself is something of a noteworthy political accomplishment for a first-term incumbent president during wartime and a sluggish economy, not only to have won re-election, but also to have done it apparently with increases in both the House and Senate. Looking back over the course of this Kerry campaign, which they say is not yet over, it is clear that Senator Kerry was faced with an overwhelming and record-setting attack blitz from the Bush administration. Shortly after Senator Kerry clinched the nomination in March of this year, Senator Kerry faced more than first $30 million and then up to $65 million worth of ads from the Bush campaign, painting him as a liberal waffler and a Democrat with a 20-year history of voting on the wrong side of a variety of issues. It essentially kept Senator Kerry on defense for much of the year, trying to explain who he is, trying to explain his positions, and thus it wasn't really until his convention and the debates that Senator Kerry was able to get anything even resembling momentum. It looks at this point as though President Bush has not only won re-election, but done so in building numbers in the House and Senate. A remarkable evening. Still some hope in the Kerry camp, but it is expected that at some point tomorrow they will have done the necessary arithmetic and realize that perhaps it's time to fold the tents on 2004. Uma, we'll send it back to you in New York.
Carl, thank you so much. A remarkable night indeed. I'd like to welcome my colleague Bob Sellers, who joins us here at the anchor desk.
Hi there. Some things accomplished today. We can say that the Republicans have gained in the Senate. We know that. Don't know exactly how many seats yet. We also know that the president appears to have won the popular vote, which may or may not play on Capitol Hill, but it might be a help if he indeed does hold on to win. And as Carl was saying, 269, that number, if indeed Ohio goes to the president, that virtually assures that he is the president once again. But very divided, just as the polls said. But again, the exit polls misleading people. So you can't count on the exit polls, but all the polls leading up to this did say this was going to be close. It's hard to call.
And again, record turnout in so many states across the country. Ohio particularly very interesting. Some people
but
waiting
on both sides.
Both sides, exactly. Yeah. And some people waiting up to 9 hours to vote in some counties of Ohio.
Traditionally, of course, a big turnout favors Democrats. And in this case, the president's people said that there are a lot of people out there who didn't vote for the president who would this time. Maybe that is indeed what happened, but the big turnout appears to not have hurt the president as much as some might have thought. Let's talk more about the president, get something something from his campaign. Jim Angle is at the Bush-Cheney headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, and he has the latest there. Jim.
Hello, Bob. Well, the Bush campaign believes they have won Ohio in spite of the reluctance by the Kerry campaign to go ahead and chalk that up as a Bush victory. And John Edwards' statement tonight was very much like Al Gore 4 years ago. But the Bush campaign is convinced it has won Ohio and that there is almost no chance that the Kerry campaign could pull it out. Here you see the 51-48 as it now stands, with the president about 140,000 votes higher. Now, that is almost exactly what the Bush campaign had been anticipating. Now, there are 140,000 provisional ballots in Ohio. Those are the ones that are in question and have to be counted later. Now, historically, Bush campaign strategists say only about 7 to 20% of provisional ballots end up being counted. So their view is that even if he did way better than what is usually the case with provisional ballots, there is no way that they could pull off Ohio. No way that Kerry could win Ohio. Nevertheless, as you heard Senator Edwards say earlier tonight, they waited 4 years. They can wait one more night for the results. So they clearly intend to wait a while. Now, one of the other things here is that the White House has not quite given up the prospect of the president saying something tonight. They are waiting on Nevada and New Mexico. Now, let's look at Nevada, where the results, where the Bush campaign had been encouraged all night. They were watching, especially around Las Vegas. You see here the president 2 points ahead, and the vote there, a pretty good margin for the president. It's a fairly small state, obviously, so you've got about 20,000. They had thought that they would lose as many as 25,000 in and around Las Vegas. In fact, they lost only a few thousand, so they look to be headed to victory there, and they're waiting for New Mexico, and the White House is still holding out the prospect the president might come out and say something tonight, or at least issue a statement. So all of that is up in the air. They are convinced they've won Ohio. They are convinced they have won this race, convinced that the president is still the president, but it looks like the Kerry people want to hold out at least another day, though the Bush people argue there is no way that they could possibly win in Ohio out of those 140,000 provisional ballots. That's where it all stands now. The Bush campaign is still pretty confident that they've got it. Bob?
Hey, Jim, let me ask you very quickly. We saw Mr. Kerry come out and say this isn't over yet. If the president does say something, what do you expect from him?
Well, that is one of the questions, and that, I think, is why they haven't decided yet. They're waiting to see if they get enough states to sort of pile up and go over the margin so that they could safely say that even with the questions in Ohio, it is clear that the president has a margin here that will hold up. And it would be difficult for the president, I think. You start to think about the year 2000, Bob, at this point. You think about the president coming out to say something, Al Gore coming out to say something. I think that is why the White House has not yet decided to have the president come out and speak, because they're trying to figure out exactly what the lay of the land is here. Who's up, who's down, how many electoral votes the president will have, what he would say if he came out, how he would handle the questions about Ohio, even though they think they've won. So all of that seems to be up in the air, and I've called a number of officials here in the last hour or so, and they're absolutely convinced they've won Ohio, but cannot quite say how they will handle this latest move by the Kerry campaign.
All right. Jim, thank you very much. Jim Angle.
Sure.
Well, as we've been talking about, Ohio proving to be a major battleground in this election as predicted. Let's go now to Fox's Jeff Goldblatt, who's standing by live in Columbus. Jeff?
Good morning to you, Uma. If you're looking for a telltale sign from the Republican Party that it is confident that the state is going red, in other words, going to George W. Bush, you look no farther than Cleveland, where we are at this hour. Members of the Cleveland or Cuyahoga Republican Party celebrating at this hour at a downtown bar, and have been for several hours. Then again, if you're looking for another sign, perhaps, of what the next strategy from the Kerry campaign might be, the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections and we're standing right out in front of it. They shut their doors about 15 minutes ago. A half hour ago, we ran across one of the top attorneys for the Democratic Party here in Cuyahoga County. His name is Mark Griffin, and my producer, Sherry Gretsch, posed a question to him. Mark, what are you doing here at this hour? And he said, not much, but he said, I want to confer with a witness who actually monitored or witnessed some of the voting here in this county. Cuyahoga County, of course, one of the Democratic strongholds. It's a place where John Kerry needed to win big. The Democratic strategy, not only in this election, but for every election in recent history, is you have to win Cuyahoga County big in order to win the state of Ohio. You have to win here big in order to offset other Republican strongholds throughout the state of Ohio. Early on in the night, we had known from the Republican Party that they were looking for a solid number of 250,000 votes by which they felt they needed to win Cuyahoga County. And we were getting this number from the Republican Party about a half hour to 45 minutes before Fox News projected George W. Bush to be the winner of Ohio. And we looked at the vote total then, and it only showed a margin, a comfortable margin for John Kerry here of about 100 to 150,000. I'm sorry the hours have passed, so I'm not really sure exactly what that vote total was. But now as I look here at the end of the night, John Kerry took Cuyahoga County, which is not unexpected, but he did so by 218,000 votes. So again, not within that number that would be hurting to the Republican Party here in the state of Ohio. So again, very comfortable here that they have this for George W. Bush. Back to you in New York.
Quite a night and quite a morning so far, Jeff. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date.
Sure.
The ballots have been cast, but the results still coming in. Next, we'll look at the impact of the election.
We're live with a Democratic strategist and a former Bush cabinet nominee. Stay tuned as we find out how you decided 2004.
President Bush has won Florida, but the vote there might not be completely counted until Thursday because of large voter turnout. Strategists say that thousands of mail-in ballots will not be counted until later in the week. Rick Leventhal has been following this story. He's live in Tallahassee. Rick.
Well, Bob, you know, in 2000, it took some 5 weeks to decide on a winner in Florida. This time around, 5 hours. But as you mentioned, there are still some ballots waiting to be counted. George W. Bush, though, does appear to have held on to the Sunshine State, which could prove key to his holding on to the presidency. With 99% of the precincts now reporting, Mr. Bush leads Senator Kerry 52 to 47%, up by more than 350,000 votes in an election where more ballots may have been cast than ever before. With more than 70% of the state's registered voters taking part. Of course, 4 years ago, the margin was just 537 votes. The key here, apparently, for the president was winning Central Florida counties, including Pinellas, Pasco, and Hernando, all of which went to Al Gore back in 2000. There could still be complications, though, Bob, including some lawsuits, one filed by the ACLU over absentee ballots, trying to force the state to count any absentee ballots that are received by November 12th. Now, that's the deadline for overseas ballots. Other absentee ballots were supposed to be received by 7 p.m. Tuesday night, but the ACLU is arguing that many of those ballots weren't sent out in time by the state for people to send them back in time to meet that deadline. So that lawsuit's still pending, but there likely won't be enough votes hanging in the balance to help Senator Kerry win Florida. There still could be a recount here, though, this time for the race to fill retiring Democratic Senator Bob Graham's seat. Republican Mel Martinez already claiming victory in his bid to become the first Cuban-American member of the Senate. He is facing off against former State Education Commissioner Betty Castor. He is leading in that race by about 70,000 votes. He's leading by about 1%. Now, it's not enough. It is enough of a margin not to force an automatic recount, but Ms. Castor has already said that based on the final tally, she may, in fact, challenge this race. She may ask for a recount. In fact, the campaign has apparently already retained a lawyer and is waiting for the final results before they make that last decision. By the way, one other race of note here, Bob, former Secretary of State Katherine Harris, who was at the center of the vote counting controversy 4 years ago, she won her re-election to Congress. But again, the big story in Tallahassee, Florida, is that President Bush has held on to this state that was so close 4 years ago. He won 4 years ago by 537 votes. This time around, apparently by at least 350,000 votes, Bob.
Rick Leventhal, thank you, sir. Well, this election also deciding the makeup of Congress that the next president will work with. A glimpse at the possible balance of power on Capitol Hill coming up in a moment.
Welcome back, everybody. Taking a look at the presidential results in swing states considered crucial to this election. We are going to take some commentary now from Los Angeles Democratic strategist Jerrick, and in Washington we have Linda Chavez. She is president of the Center for Equal Opportunity and was nominated for Labor Secretary by President Bush. Welcome to both of you. Nice to have you here.
Good to be with you.
Jerrick, let me begin with you. The Kerry camp now reluctant to concede Ohio, saying that every vote in that state is going to be counted. We saw Senator Edwards coming out, cheering the troops on in Boston, saying that this does not end here tonight into this morning. What do you make of all this?
Well, I think that after what happened in 2000, everybody wants to be very certain that we know the results before we conclude the race.
And Linda Chavez, from your perspective, do you think at this point the provisional ballots have any impact on this race?
Well, I don't think they do. And in fact, I think that the Kerry campaign is taking Bruce Springsteen's song, No Retreat, No Surrender, just a little bit too seriously. They seem to have adopted it as their campaign theme. And I think that this is really a very bad precedent. I think if John Kerry were truly concerned, as he seems to be, about how the United States appears to the rest of the world, that one of the things that would be very good would be for him to concede this race and to move forward rather than trying to throw it into the courts and trying to very bitterly divide this country once again.
Talk about voter turnout for just a moment, Jerrick. The Democrats certainly counting on a large turnout by younger voters this time around. Did you see that happening in many states across the country?
My impression at this point is that we did not see the kind of turnout in younger voters that we were looking for. I mean, very clearly there was this big increase in registration. There was a hope on our part that the new voters were going to be Democrats, and we'll sift through this after the fact, but it appears that that hope wasn't borne out.
Linda Chavez, what do you think was the deciding factor in Ohio for voters there? Certainly the electorate really polarized on a number of fronts. Iraq, of course, being a major concern to people across the country. What are your thoughts about the way the vote has been coming down in Ohio and other states across the country?
Well, first of all, I think Ohio, there was a provision on the ballot in Ohio to recognize marriage as between a man and a woman, one man and one woman. This apparently brought out a lot of Christian voters. There were about a quarter of the electorate in Ohio, at least according to some analyses, that were in fact evangelical voters, so that may have helped the president there. I also think that the whole issue of moral values, there were a lot of the exit polls in questioning people about what made the difference in terms of how they voted. The economy certainly played in most states, but so did the issue of moral values, and I think this was an issue that cut in favor of the president.
When we talk about the issues of polarization, certainly in terms of the winners and the losers, we are going to have to see the winner here come out and try to heal what has been a very divided country over a number of issues that Linda Chavez is pointing to and Mr. Shrego is pointing to as well. Jerrick, Shrego, what do you think has to happen now in order for the country to come together?
I think that the country will come together if the president, if in fact he's been reelected, and it appears that he has been, governs from the center. I think that he had a chance after he was elected. I think he had a second chance after 9/11. And now, if he's been reelected, he has a third chance to govern that from that mass, that huge center that represents most Americans. And I would be very careful before I would agree with Linda's conclusion that this is about moral values. I mean, clearly there is some of that, but the fact is that this country consists of about 280 million people, most of whom are very scared by the threat of terrorism, and risk was a huge factor in this election. And if the president's won, clearly people ultimately decided, the majority ultimately decided that they would stick with him rather than make a change in the face of the terrorist threat. That does not give the president a broad mandate to impose his social conservatism on everybody in this country.
Linda Chavez, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, I would. Well, first of all, I think that what we have to recognize is that this was really a very big victory for the Republicans tonight. It has been many, many decades since we have seen the president who was reelected, not just being reelected, but actually his party gaining seats in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. It looks like the Republicans are going to pick up about 4 seats in the United States Senate. They also picked up seats in the House. This does look like a mandate for the Republicans. And I think if you want to talk about healing, the most important thing is for Democrats to quit talking about illegitimacy, to quit basically not accepting the will of the people. And if you do end up with a kind of 51-48 vote here in favor of President Bush, I would hope that John Kerry will not just concede, but will urge his supporters to support this president.
All right, on that note, we'll have to leave the discussion there. I thank both of you for joining us into the early morning hours here in New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the South Dakota senatorial race has been too close to call all night. Senate Minority Leader, that's Tom Daschle, of course, facing a serious threat from former Congressman John Thune. Carol McKinley joins us now live from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with the latest on what's going on there. Carol.
Hey there, Bob. Well, we're here at the Sioux Falls Convention Center where all the Democrats have gathered, and they've been waiting to hear from Tom Daschle, who's upstairs in one of the hotel rooms watching election returns with his family. So far, not a word from him. We don't know why he's not coming down to talk to people. John Thune is across the street at Republican headquarters. He hasn't come down to talk to his supporters. I talked with one of his press people a little while ago who told me that he doesn't want to say anything about this election until he knows he's won it. Now, at this point, there are 94 precincts in. John Thune is leading Tom Daschle by 2 points. That amounts to 8,000 votes. And in South Dakota, where you only have 375,000 or so voters, that's quite a bit. In fact, 2 years ago, when John Thune ran for Senate, he went to sleep the night of the election thinking he'd won. He woke up the next morning and he had to wait a couple of days as the Native American vote came in, and it ended up that he lost that race to Tim Johnson by only 524 votes. Most people believe that Native Americans delivered that election to Tim Johnson. Well, John Thune doesn't want to make that mistake again. Again, the Native American vote hasn't come in yet. Those votes have not been counted at all in Shannon and Todd counties here in South Dakota. That could amount to 5,000 American Indians. So at this point, with Thune ahead by 8,000 and an approximate 5,000 votes, mostly coming in for the Democrat Tom Daschle, you do the math. At this point, John Thune might come down in 1, 2, maybe 3 hours. We just don't know. It's very close. But again, 94% of precincts in and 2-point advantage for John Thune. Now, if Tom Daschle does lose, this Senate race has been touted as the second most important election in the country next to the presidential election. It's been 52 years since a Senate party leader has been defeated. This could be the year it happens again. Back to you guys.
Carol McKinley, thank you. More now on the House and Senate results. Joining us from Irvine, California, Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, and from Studio City, California, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman. Both are members of the House International Relations Committee. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Congressman Sherman, give me your feel, if the numbers hold up tonight, what effect this has on Capitol Hill.
Well, I think it continues the same correlation of forces that we've had for the last 4 years. It is certainly not a mandate for massive change. I think if the president decides to govern from the center, and if in fact he's reelected, that he may be able to bring the country together. Now, we've got to count all the votes so we know who the president is, but you asked me to assume that President Bush is reelected. If that's the case, I hope he chooses to govern from the center, because he won this election kind of the way, if he did win at all, he won the way Gray Davis won, tearing down his opponent. And that doesn't give an incumbent a mandate it simply puts him back in office.
Congressman Rohrabacher, it was kind of a tough campaign. We all watched it. We all saw it get nasty at times. Does he have a point that this could make things difficult on Capitol Hill?
Well, first of all, it's been difficult. We've passed great legislation through the House of Representatives, for example, on litigation reform and many other areas like that. But the Democrats, who are a minority in the Senate, have been able to take advantage of the rules of the Senate in order to be obstructionist. The chief obstructionist, of course, was Tom Daschle, not permitting anything to happen for the last 2 years that were passed through the House. Now, let's note this. In the last 10 minutes, we've heard two Democrat leaders talk about, well, the president has to govern from the center. Well, let me note something. This vote was a vote for a Republican coalition which was center-right. The Democrats are way off to the left. The issues, for example, one man and one woman being what a marriage is all about, is supported by 80% of the American people. That is the center. And if we're talking about keeping God in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, that is the center. 80% of the American people believe in these things. The Democratic Party is way off in a left-wing coalition, and that's why the president won this election.
Congressman Sherman, President Bush did run 4 years ago as a compassionate conservative, yet he did govern as a more conservative, more right-wing conservative, and pretty much presented himself that way this time, so people kind of knew what they were getting. Does Congressman Rohrabacher have a point that they knew what they were voting for, and they do support his policies, which are a little more conservative than you might like?
Well, there's certainly no mandate to privatize Social Security. There's no mandate to add more loopholes to the corporate income tax. And the president, if he won by tearing down John Kerry. Had he not done that, had there not been the Swift Vote veterans, had there not been all the attacks against Kerry as a so-called flip-flopper, obviously this race would have been different. Now, I'm not criticizing George Bush for attacking his opponent. God knows the attacks went in both directions. I'm just saying if you win by attacking your opponent, you can't claim a mandate to radically change this country.
Yes, we know the attacks went in both directions. Mr. Soros spent millions and millions of dollars, and Mr. Michael Moore in his blasphemous movie, which is just total BS and non-factual, have spread the worst possible kind of lies about the president. Now, yeah, it got a little personal, but let's not claim that this president was any more negative about his opponent than, of course, the opponents of George Bush who were against him.
All right, gentlemen.
There were terrible lies against Senator Kerry as well.
We appreciate you both weighing in on this. Congressman Rohrabacher and Congressman Sherman, both in California. Thank you.
Joining us now, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Ed Gillespie. Mr. Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us. Nice to have you here.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It appears that the president tonight will be reelected, but the Kerry camp is unwilling to concede Ohio at this point. What's your reaction to this news?
Well, my reaction is if you look at the math, it's really out of reach for Senator Kerry. The fact is the president enjoys a 137,600 vote margin right now in Ohio. That's with 98% of the precincts reporting, including 100% of Cuyahoga, but not all of Hamilton County is in, and the president's winning handily there. There are about 120 to 130,000 provisional ballots that have been cast that the Democrats say could make up the difference. But the fact is, when you look at the history of provisional ballots just recently in Cook County, Illinois, in the Democratic primary, between 7 and 23% of those ballots were counted. Provisional ballots aren't like early votes or absentee ballots. In fact, they are not counted unless proven valid. And so if you assume they got 25% of those that count in this election, that would be about worth 31,000 ballots to be counted. Let's say they got 100% of those. 100% of all of the counted ballots.
Together. The two of you stand out together.
Back down. Of over 100,000 votes in Ohio. That's why Senators Voinovich and DeWine have said it is out of reach, and the Senator Kerry should concede. So we'll see how it plays out, but those numbers are important to bear in mind.
They are important to bear in mind, indeed. We were told that there may be a chance that the president may be coming out tonight to make a statement. Is that going to be the case?
Well, the crowd is here. We're all watching to see other states come in. The president is leading in Nevada and New Mexico. We'll wait to see if some other states come in. I can't speak for the president. It's not my job. I have to defer to the White House and the campaign to announce his schedule. I'm sorry.
Well, now, let me ask you this. The voter turnout among young voters was not as high as the Democrats had predicted. What do you attribute to the success so far of the Bush campaign in terms of those who came out to vote?
Well, our ground game was the best I've ever seen it in a Republican presidential campaign. We had 1 million volunteers on the ground, and the most dangerous place to be today was between a Bush voter and a voting booth. We had people going to the polls in droves because of their support for this president, and our ground game, though, is really what accounted for that. Those people, I have been all over the country in the past week. I've seen people who work 40 hours a week, 45 hours a week at their jobs, and then are working 20, 25 hours a week at our phone banks. It is inspirational, and those folks got their friends, their neighbors, their relatives to the polls today. It's remarkable.
Of course, this campaign, one of the most contentious and one of the most expensive campaigns in history. A big question tonight, of course, how do you bring the country back together after this great divide that we've witnessed over the last several months?
Well, I think we saw obviously tonight a decisive win in the popular vote, about a 3-point margin in the popular vote. We saw a decisive win. I suspect, when everybody wakes up tomorrow, the Republicans will have 55 seats in the United States Senate as a result of the president's strong push across the country to pass his agenda, and will gain seats in the House of Representatives as well. So I'm not sure the country is as closely divided as it's being made out to be. It looks to me to be a pretty decisive win today.
When you take a look at some of the factors in this campaign that made this quite the horse race throughout week to week, do you point to any specific turning point in this campaign that allowed you to feel hopeful that the momentum was on your side?
I don't. I think it was a steady discussion of the issues and the president's focus on a positive agenda for America, laying out his plan for continuing to reduce our taxes, to simplify our tax code, to make health care more affordable, to make us less reliant on foreign source of energy, to improve our schools, and to win the war on terror. And I think those things combined for his majority today.
There were a lot of concerns about voting irregularities in states across the country and folks dealing with voter intimidation. We really didn't hear much of that.
No, and in fact, the only thing we really heard of was intimidation of Republican voters who were standing in line and were harassed by MoveOn.org and some of the other Kerry supporting organizations. We had in Wisconsin our Get Out the Vote vans. We were driving people to the polls who were elderly or disabled and getting Bush voters to get out to vote. And 40 of them had their tires slashed by somebody. I assume that to be a Kerry supporter. So the only intimidation tactics we saw today were those deployed against Republican voters.
And again, as we've been noting throughout this evening into the morning, the turnout very high, and some people waiting in line for up to 8 hours, 9 hours in Ohio, for example.
It is a great country, and people were very motivated. This is a big issues election. There's no muddy middle in this election. There's a big choice, very clear differences between where President Bush will take this country and where Senator Kerry would have taken it. And I think that's why voters were so intent on waiting through the lines. And I think both parties did a good job getting new voters involved in the process. We registered 3.4 million Republican voters in this election cycle, and I think probably every one of them turned out today to vote.
What is your expectation then? Do you believe that you're going to be able to claim a decisive victory later this morning or tomorrow, or you think it's going to drag on for a few days because of what the Democrats want to do with Ohio?
Well, again, when you look at the math, it's very clear how Ohio is going to end up. When you just do the, you look at the president's margin and what's out there in terms of the provisional ballots, it's very clear where Ohio is going to end up.
So you must be very excited tonight, knowing that it's been a long, hard-fought campaign. And what do you think the president's first priorities are going to be once this is behind him?
Well, again, the president laid out a clear agenda to improve our public schools and our high schools the way we've been doing with our elementary schools through No Child Left Behind, to make health care more affordable, drive out these frivolous lawsuits that drive up the cost of quality care, to continue to create jobs in our economy. We've had nearly 2 million jobs created in the past year, and to win the war on terror, waging an aggressive war on terror over there, waging it abroad so it's not waged here at home. The president's agenda is very clear, and he now has a very strong majority in the House and the Senate to help him enact it.
Ed Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us with your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
By the way, folks, Carl Cameron, our chief political correspondent, is telling us now that the president is expected to speak tonight if New Mexico and Nevada are called for him. Of course, that still assumes that Ohio would also go for him, but that number would put him over the 270, which he needs to win in the Electoral College. Now, the campaign's put a lot of energy into the swing state of New Mexico and its 5 electoral votes, which I'll remind you last time went to Mr. Gore, but this time President Bush ahead right now by some 25,000 votes, and if that holds up, indeed, well, now we got 99% of the precincts in. Oh, we're looking at New Mexico. That also looking stronger for the president. Both of those very important. Trace Gallagher is live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, following this. Trace, what's the latest?
Yeah, and don't forget, Bob, that last in 2000, Al Gore won New Mexico by 366 votes. You're right, with 99% of the precincts now in, they're still giving President Bush a pretty wide margin, 52% to 47%. So why have they not called the election yet? Well, because there's a debate out there about how many outstanding votes still remain, and here's why. Now, 800,000 New Mexicans went to the polls, a record 75% voter turnout, but 400,000 of them voted prior to today. In other words, they voted early or they put in absentee ballots, and there is a big question going on about how many of those ballots have yet to be counted. Depending on who you talk to, they say it goes from 100,000 to 200,000. Now, local television is reporting that most of the absentee ballots in Bernalillo County, which is the largest county in New Mexico, it's where Albuquerque is, have now been counted. It gave a few votes to John Kerry, but not enough to make a difference in this race. And we are now hearing that the senior senator from this state, Pete Domenici, a Republican, is now going to go on television, or is on television locally as we speak, saying that he is going to give and call the election for President Bush, with the caveat that there are still a number of votes left to be counted. Are there enough votes to swing this election? Unlikely, but he is still offering the caveat. President Bush came back strong in this election for one major reason, because of the Hispanic vote. Hispanics make up 42% of the population in this state, and President Bush captured 44% of the Hispanic vote. It doesn't sound like a lot, but they were expecting somewhere around 25 to 30%, so a huge showing that very well could have put him over the top. Once this state is called, it puts, of course, President Bush, if Ohio is in the mix, over the 269 to 274 category, and that is when the president will likely speak to the nation. Bob?
All right. Thank you very much, Trace.
Well, as we've been reporting, there have been some problems at the polls and some 11th hour court rulings, raising some questions about when the final results become official. A fair and balanced look at some of the voting irregularities of 2004 coming your way. Stay with us. We are back with You Decide 2004. Of course, Iraq, a central issue in this campaign. Our troops who are serving there watch a live television coverage of the election returns as they awoke this morning. And of course, the stakes remain high for our folks on the front lines. Greg Palcott joins us live by video phone. He's embedded near Fallujah with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Greg?
Hey, Uma. Well, I got to admit that the Marines here are a little bit preoccupied. They're looking at preparing for a possible full-scale ground assault on the terror hotbed of Fallujah, but they have been keeping an eye on the election returns in the states. Of course, it's very important to them. We've got a few Marines with us now. We'll get some quick reactions to the early results to the presidential polling. To the left of me, I've got Lance Corporal Chris Seif from Chicago. How you doing, Chris?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Did you vote absentee ballot?
Yes, I did.
And may I ask who you voted for?
Sure, I voted for President Bush.
Now, it looks like things are trending in the direction of the president. If that happens, would that be a good thing, and why?
I believe it is a good thing. Us as Marines, we believe in unity of command, and it's almost like taking the all-star quarterback out before the big game.
Okay, that's the word from Lieutenant Corporal Chris Seid, Lance Corporal Chris Seid from Chicago. We'll shift over here to my right, talk to Corporal Eric Shelby. Did you vote, Eric?
Yes, sir, I did.
And is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? You're out here in the foxholes, but that you're able to vote and express your opinion? If so, why?
Without a doubt. I mean, being as far away from home as we are, it gives us a great opportunity to kind of embed ourselves with what's going on back in the States.
And finally, folks back home, we're with the Corpsman Justin Oliver for your education. A Corpsman is a medic in any other unit, but you call your Corpsman. How you doing, Justin?
Pretty good.
Now, you told me you didn't vote.
No, I didn't. I didn't find the time for some reason.
A little bit too busy fixing bandages and things like that.
Pretty much taking care of my guys here, make sure they're safe.
Now, in general, the military has favored the prosecution of the war on terror, et cetera. How do you feel about the way the Bush administration has been handling things here and around the world?
I think he's been doing a great job. I mean, I see no reason why he shouldn't be in office 4 more years. Great idea to keep him here and keep him going.
Well, that's the word, Uma, from 3 Marines here at a base near Fallujah. In general, they reflect the polling data of the U.S. military that, in general, they're behind President Bush, behind the Republican Party, and behind the prosecution of the war on terror. There are other people who speak otherwise. Maybe we'll be hearing from them later on in the morning, but these are 3 Marines and pretty representative of the feeling that we got here at this base. That's it from a base with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force near Fallujah, Iraq. Back to you in New York.
Greg Palka, thank you so much. And of course, we thank our brave soldiers who are there on the front lines. Thank you so much for joining us.
The elections here in America come about a month after Afghanistan's elections. Those, of course, an accomplishment of the U.S. war on terror. Another major issue in the campaign here, of course. Scott Heidler joins us live by video phone from Kabul, Afghanistan. Scott.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you. Sorry about the background noise. And actually, I have a little bit of breaking news to tell you. Hamid Karzai went to the polls with 17 other candidates on October 9th. We've been waiting for that election result, and from what we've been heard, what we're being told, that's going to happen officially in about 2 hours' time from now. Again, a panel who was looking into voter fraud for the Afghan presidential election that happened on October 9th should make its announcement official at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock our time this afternoon, which is in about 2-3 hours. Then Hamid Karzai is officially the next president of Afghanistan. He's been serving as the interim president, and now he will serve a role as the officially elected, first democratically elected president of Afghanistan for the next 5 years. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date on that and get you that news as soon as it becomes official. But a press conference just convened probably about 15, 20 minutes ago. So we're just waiting for this official photo opportunity in a couple hours. And we'll obviously bring that up to you now. Then on to the election on your side of the world. Here in Kabul this morning, the U.S. Embassy held an event for its staff and also about 1,000 of the Americans living here in Kabul to go and see some of the results. It's kind of an early morning for us. We all arrived at about 6:30, got to see some of the results. Nothing really that major at that time because everyone had to go off to work. So we hung out there for about 3 hours, got to have a good breakfast, see some people, and quite frankly, it was divided almost right down the middle. Kerry supporters, Bush supporters. So we'll see. But again, that news, Afghan President Hamid Karzai will be made official as the next president of Afghanistan in just a few hours' time. Bob, back to you in New York.
Scott Heidler, thank you very much, Scott.
Our coverage will continue in just a moment, and when we come back, we're going to take a closer look at what's happening in Ohio. The Kerry camp, at this point, unwilling to concede that state, even though it does look and appears that President Bush has taken Ohio. We will continue to focus on that race when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody, to our continuing coverage of You Decide 2004. President Bush is the projected winner of Ohio, but it may not be over just yet, as we've been reporting. John Kerry's campaign manager released a statement earlier this evening. Mary Beth Cahill saying the vote count in Ohio has not been completed. There are more than 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We believe when they are, John Kerry will win Ohio. Is Ohio this year's Florida? And if so, Major Garrett has the details on how things may shake out. Take a look.
Fox News has called Ohio for President Bush, but if the final results in the Buckeye State are razor thin, there could be the prospect, however remote, of either a mandatory recount, the counting of provisional ballots, or some potential litigation. Let's take these issues in order. Ohio state law requires a recount if the margin of victory is 1/4%. The next potential point of interest, provisional ballots. Now, these are ballots cast by a voter who went to the polls but was not on the registration lists. But these ballots will only be counted if the margin of victory for the president is smaller than the aggregate number of provisional ballots. And state officials tell Fox they will not know the total number of provisional ballots until sometime Wednesday morning. The provisional ballots will first be checked to verify the vote is from a legally registered voter, and then and only then will that vote be counted. There could also be litigation over Republican efforts to challenge voter registration lists, but that is not only a legal long shot, but the least likely scenario for a challenge to the Ohio presidential outcome. Lastly, it's important to note that about 70% of Ohio's projected 6 million votes this election year will be cast on punch card ballots. But unlike Florida, Ohio is not fearful of the return of the Chad. Ohio has a statewide standard for counting punch card ballots. The vote is registered if the Chad is perforated cleanly in 2 places. You remember each Florida county had its own punch card standards, which is how we all learned the intricacies of pregnant and dimpled Chads. If there is an Ohio recount, there may be other issues, but Chads are not likely to be among them. In Washington, Major Garrett, Fox News.
More now about those voting problems in some of the battleground states. We're joined in Washington by Julian Epstein. He's a Democratic strategist and former House Judiciary Committee counsel. He just returned from Ohio.
Also here with us in New York City, Mark Smith. He's a constitutional attorney working for the Republicans. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Mark, let me begin with you. Talk to us for a moment about this matter surrounding the provisional ballots. I mean, right now, even the Secretary of State in Ohio is saying from his projections, there are probably no more than 140,000 provisional ballots. And when you're talking about those ballots, you're talking about the fact that there are problems.
Look, here's the bottom line. The Republican Party wants we, the people, to decide elections. The Democratic Party wants the courts and litigators and trial lawyers to make decisions. The Democrats are doing what they did in 2000, which is to try to throw the election to their favorite activist liberal judges. But it's not going to work this time because George Bush has won a popular vote mandate of over 4 million votes. In Ohio, he's up ahead 140,000 votes. And in terms of the number of provisional ballots that may have been cast, you're looking at maybe 110, 120,000, not the 250,000 that John Kerry spokesperson came out earlier and said. The reality is, the only question is, will the Democrats try to drag out this process before John Kerry concedes, simply to create the false impression that there was something wrong with the process that elected George Bush overwhelmingly to another term?
Julian, let's talk about that. Can we see, I don't know if we have the board on Ohio, but almost 100% of the precincts are reported, and we're talking about a difference of over 100, say 120,000. I don't know if maybe we'll bring that up while we're talking here. But even if there were 150, let's say, 150,000 provisional ballots, now we're looking at that. There's 130,000 difference, 150,000 right there we're looking at. Right. Is there any real possibility with 99% of the precincts in that this outcome is going to change?
In my judgment, not really. And let me just say, with respect to the comments that Mark just made, those are the kind of comments I would expect to hear from an extreme partisan, not from a serious student of the electoral process. I think the following is important. I think it's very important for both parties at this point, because the country and the world is watching, to conduct themselves with dignity. I don't think there's any interest in a protracted litigation or some kind of protracted recount of the voting situation. I remind Mark that it was President Bush that took the case to the Supreme Court. I do think this. I think that if there is some plausible mathematical formula whereby the provisional ballots and the absentee ballots could make up the margin of difference, then we ought to count the votes. If there isn't, and right now I don't see it, I think it's an uphill battle for Kerry, given the figures that you cite, which I largely accept. Some people have put the provisional ballots closer to 175. I don't think we'll know that until the morning. If there is some plausible scenario, then we ought to look under the hood. I think the only thing the Kerry team is doing right now is they're dispatching a team of experts out to Ohio to take a closer look under the hood. I think the kind of comments that Mark makes are intended to make this thing more, to bring strife to this, to bring more controversy to this, and there isn't that at this point right now. I think we ought to take a look at the votes, look at the situation in the morning. If there's a plausible scenario, we ought to do the count. If there isn't, I think Kerry ought to concede.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, the debate will continue and rage on. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Stay tuned for more Team Fox coverage of You Decide 2004. We'll catch you up on the very latest with live reports from the Bush camp, the Kerry camp, and everywhere else that matters coming up at the top of the hour.
Still no definite answer yet as you look at live numbers of the popular vote for the President of the United States, Mr. Bush, in this case. You may remember 4 years ago, President Bush won the presidency, did not win the popular vote. Not the case here. He has a majority of the vote here, 56 million to Kerry's 52 million. Numbers still coming in, but we're pretty close to the end. This is Fox News continuing coverage of You Decide 2004. It is 4 a.m. in the east, 1 a.m. out west from the Fox News World headquarters in New York. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Sellers.
And I'm Uma Pemmaraju. We thank you so much for joining us in the early hours of this day. Yeah,
early hours, and here we are at 4 in the morning. Did we think that we would actually still be wondering who won, even though it looks quite apparent that President Bush has won? The only question that the Democrats are holding up, really, when you do the math, is as far what's going on in Ohio, which we've been talking about all night. But as we've been talking about that math, it doesn't seem at this point that those numbers add up to what the Kerry people are hoping for. That's right. But John Edwards came out and made a comment that we're not giving this up. We're going to continue the fight. So maybe that's what we expect. Another nail biter, though, again for President Bush. Fox's Mike Emanuel is live from the Bush-Cheney headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. Mike.
Well, Bob, Uma, good morning from the White House, or good evening from the White House, depending on how you look at it. Bush-Cheney strategists continue to say that they believe that President Bush has carried the state of Ohio, and they are waiting for a couple of final results from the state of New Mexico and also the state of Nevada before President Bush will speak. We know President Bush is here at the White House. We know that Vice President Dick Cheney was spotted in the press area within the last hour or so. He said he was going to his office to keep an eye on things. Now, much earlier this evening, or hours ago, President Bush invited cameras into the residence to watch him and his family watch election returns coming in. The president appeared quite confident at that point, watching the numbers coming in throughout the evening. The president's parents were also on hand, and the president told reporters at that point that they were very upbeat, that they believed he would win, and that he felt good about things. President Bush also said he was glad to be there watching with his family, watching the returns come in on this election night. Now, I believe we have the numbers out of the state of Ohio, the state that let's take a look. Here we go on the screen. We've got 51-48 with 99% of the precincts in. 2.771 million votes for the president, 2.624. So that helps, or that shows you why Bush-Cheney officials believe that there is no way that Senator Kerry could win the state of Ohio. Obviously, the Kerry folks have a different take on that. Regarding Ohio, we know that the president visited the Buckeye State, according to our count, some 41 times, including a visit to Columbus on Election Day. And so the latest from here at the White House, as you take a look at the swing states there on your screen, Ohio with 20 electoral votes. And, of course, there's that statistic that no Republican has ever won the White House without carrying the state of Ohio. At this point, Bush-Cheney officials believe that the president has indeed carried the state of Ohio. And what we're hearing from the strategists is that they are waiting for the final word out of New Mexico and Nevada. And then we're expecting some movement. We expect that the president would go over to the Reagan Building, cross town here in Washington, and make some kind of statement to supporters and also to reporters. Back to you guys in New York.
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you, sir.
Sure.
Well, Florida has gone the same way that it ultimately went back in the 2000 election, but it looks like the state gave President Bush a slightly larger margin of victory this time around. Rick Leventhal joins us now live from Tallahassee with more on that story. Rick?
Uma, there could be a recount in Florida's future, but not in the presidential race. As you mentioned, back in 2000, George W. Bush won this state by the slimmest of margins, less than 600 votes. This time around, he appears to have won Florida by roughly 350,000 votes. With 99% of precincts reporting, Mr. Bush leads Senator Kerry 52 to 47%. That's with more than 70% of the state's registered voters taking part, possibly setting a record here. Some of those voters waiting up to 6 hours in lines even today, or I should say yesterday, to cast ballots. The I-4 corridor in Central Florida, perhaps one of the keys for the president winning Florida. He won several counties that former Vice President Al Gore won back in 2000, including Pinellas, Pasco, and Hernando counties. Now, there could still be some complications here in Florida, including lawsuits, one filed by the ACLU over absentee ballots. The ACLU trying to force the state to count any absentee ballots received by November 12th. That's the deadline for overseas absentee ballots. The other absentee ballots were supposed to be thrown out if they weren't received by 7 p.m. Tuesday. However, the ACLU is arguing that many of those ballots weren't sent to the voters until it was too late for them to get sent back. So there could be a contentious lawsuit there. However, it doesn't appear that there are enough votes that would help Senator Kerry win back this state. As for retiring Democratic Senator Bob Graham's seat, that's where the real horse race is now. Republican Mel Martinez now claiming victory in his bid to become the first Cuban-American member of the U.S. Senate. Martinez, a former Bush administration housing secretary, holds a lead of just under 1 percentage point, right around 0.9%, over former state education commissioner Betty Castor. Martinez leads by about 70,000 votes. Now, that's enough to avoid an automatic recount, but close enough that Castor's camp has reportedly hired a lawyer and is preparing to challenge the results depending on the final tally. One other election note here, former Secretary of State Katherine Harris, who was at the head of the election vote controversy back in 2000, has won her re-election bid to Congress. But again, Uma and Bob, quite a day here in Tallahassee and in Florida for President Bush, who appears to have won convincingly a race that was very, very tight 4 years ago.
Absolutely. What a difference we are seeing now 4 years later. Rick Leventhal, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Well, a tremendous letdown for the Kerry campaign. Exit polls earlier today showed him with a narrow lead in Ohio and in Florida. But now it looks like President Bush is going to take both of those states and put it in the red column. Kelly Wright joins us now live from Boston. Kelly, expectations, of course, running high for the Kerry camp earlier tonight. Give us a sense of what the mood is like at this hour.
Well, let me see if I can set the stage this way. It began as early as yesterday when people gathered here in Copley Square to set the stage for the dramatic voter turnout. And then throughout the night, they watched the results come in. They were partying here in Copley Square, waiting John Kerry to come talk to them, win or lose. And then somewhere in the middle of the night, when Ohio began to unravel and the Kerry camp decided to contest the results there, before coming here to talk to the people, which is something that people really had longed for, they sent out John Kerry's running mate, John Edwards. And a lot of people met that with disappointment, but John Edwards came out and said they will fight the good fight until every vote is counted for. Here's what John Edwards said to the crowd.
Thank you. It's been a long night, but we've waited 4 years for this victory. We can wait one more night. Tonight, John and I are so proud of all of you who are here with us and all of you across the country who have stood with us in this campaign. John Kerry and I made a promise to the American people that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted. Tonight, we are keeping our word, and we will fight for every vote. You deserve no less. Thank you.
And with that, an announcer came on and said this event is over. The crowd dispersed. Many of those people within the crowd saying they were sad and disappointed not to have heard from John Kerry himself. We understand there's a full lid on the Kerry operation right now, meaning that we may not hear anything until 10 a.m. When the Kerry camp will likely come forward and announce what they're going to do. Or, as I'm told, we could be hearing from Joe Lockhart at some point throughout the day, or Tad Devine. We just don't know at this point. But what we do understand is this, is that the Kerry advisors seem to be rather glum in the nearby Westin Hotel, where some of the Kerry senior people were actually staying and keeping track of all the day's events in terms of the elections. Many of them, according to our senior political correspondent Carl Cameron, looked very chagrined, very glum, very sad, indicating that we knew it was going to be close. And so they've gone through so many mood swings, from being almost euphoric and giddy and lighthearted and happy. John Kerry passing out fleeces, red fleeces on the travel plane with the travel press corps, shaking hands and being very happy and stoic about the election, and being optimistic about the results. It's raining here in Boston, if I could put it bluntly, and perhaps metaphorically, it's raining on John Kerry's parade. We will have to wait and see, because they want those provisional ballots counted. They want to find out exactly what's going on. They believe that they can contest this, but a lot of people are saying it's insurmountable in Ohio, and President Bush has clearly won there. President Bush having 269 electoral votes right now, and Kerry having 242. So we will follow the developments of the day. Again, we await word from John Kerry or Kerry's camp sometime throughout the day, but we don't anticipate anything until around 10 a.m. Back to you.
And that is still several hours away. Kelly Wright, thank you so much for bringing us up to date from what is now a very disappointed Kerry camp.
Much more on the election results still ahead, how the candidates did in all those important swing states, plus fair and balanced analysis from both sides of the political aisle. Stay with Fox News for continuing coverage throughout the morning and into the daylight hours. Coming sometime soon, in fact. Stay with us for You Decide 2004.
Taking a look at the swing states that are in play in this presidential contest. There you have it. You take a look at Ohio right now. We've got John Kerry with 48% and to George Bush's 51%. President Bush, the projected winner there, with 100% of the precincts reporting in. Florida, Kerry with 47% to Mr. Bush's 52%. Again, Mr. Bush, the projected winner there, with 99% of the precincts reporting in. Pennsylvania, again, we see it is a 99% of the precincts reporting in, with John Kerry 51 to George Bush's 49%. Iowa still in play, 49% going to John Kerry and 50% to George Bush. 99% of those precincts reporting in at this hour.
Well, joining us from Boston, Democratic strategist Ellen Ratner, and in Washington, syndicated columnist Michelle Malkin. She leans to the right. Both are Fox News contributors, of course. Let's start with you, Ellen. Sum up tonight for me from your perspective.
Well, you know, it all started with the exit polls that had the Democrats very excited, and then as the night went on, they got less and less excited. And I, as a Democratic opinion journalist, got less excited as well. I am not a happy camper, but it's not 100% over, though I have to say it's not looking great.
Yeah, Michelle, how do you bridge that gap? I mean, this looks like it's... A lot of people feel this was kind of an ugly campaign, especially in those swing states where they were bombarded with these ads. How do you make things better in Washington so that it works?
Well, actually, I think America has a lot to be proud of as they wake up this morning. And there were a lot of antics on both sides, although having followed it, I think that there were a lot more stories of unhinged politicking by the left. But for the most part, we saw things run smoothly from one coast to the other. And I think that's an incredible validation that this republic has was held together quite well. And as Ellen mentioned, though, the Democrats are quite glum, and if the Ohio prediction stays true and Bush holds that, then Bush has won this election and won very convincingly. I mean, if you look at the spread in Florida, it wasn't even close. Missouri by 8 points, Florida by 5 points, and you know, I think maybe these claims of this country being so helplessly divided have been overhyped.
Ellen.
Actually, it's interesting. We're doing a special called Red State, Blue State. How would you see heal America? And first of all, I think Florida will wind up being closer when you have the absentees and everything. I don't think it's going to be 5%. But the fact is, 1 or 2% is still very divided, and I actually worry about our country. I'm very glad that people got out and vote in the numbers that they got out and voted. I think that that's great, but I am still worried that we have a divide in terms of how we see this country going, and I am hoping that George Bush becomes a uniter, not a divider, although he certainly didn't do so well in the last year or two on that.
By the way, John Kerry, if I could just say real quickly, John Kerry could certainly help heal the divide himself by being a gracious loser rather than a sore loser. We heard John Edwards say that they will make sure that every vote is counted, and really the question now is how far they will go to drag this thing out and to delegitimize Bush's win.
Michelle, if you could hold on just a second. We wanted to show, we're not going to listen in, but we want to show you at least in South Dakota. This is John Thune, who assumes that he has won the senatorial election there, deposing, if you will, Tom Daschle as the Senate Minority Leader. I believe that's the first time in 52 years something like that has happened. We are not calling that election just yet, but we wanted you to be aware of it. Again, John Thune, former rep, now apparently a senator, or at least he believes he has one, and is holding that meeting himself right now to that end. Michelle, let me ask very quickly. The president did not even win the popular vote 4 years ago, but went in, and as I understand it, his team said, we are going to act as if we had a mandate. Yet some people feel that alienated some on the other side of the aisle. Does the president contribute to the problems in going across the aisle himself?
Well, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that I think that the Bush campaign is handling it exactly right now. I mean, we'll have to see, you know, when they're going to come out. And there's a bunch of folks waiting right out here in D.C. outside the Ronald Reagan building to see if there's going to be some kind of statement. But I think everybody's learned from 2000. And as I say, I think that there's an onus on the Kerry campaign to do what it can to make sure.
And what do you think that should be, very quickly, so we can give Ellen a chance?
I think he should concede at 10 o'clock.
Okay. Ellen?
Well, I think that, look, the president stopped meeting with Congress about a year after 9/11. He was meeting with the joint leadership of Congress. He has not done what he can do to really heal the country, and I am hoping that now that he doesn't have to run for another election, that he takes this 4 years and begins the heal, because we desperately need it.
Ellen, there is a theory that the Democrats are working on the next election already by not conceding and by giving the appearance that this, again, in their opinion, would not be a legitimate election of President Bush. Do you believe that's what's going on?
No, I honestly think that, look, we saw how close it was in the year 2000. Why not wait until every vote is counted? Why not wait until we've had a look at the provisional ballots in Ohio and the whole issue of the ballots that were lost in Florida in terms of the absentee ballot? Why not do that? It doesn't kill us to wait a day or two.
Last word, Michelle, very quickly.
Well, why not? Because at some point it's futile. I mean, they're going to have to take a look at the provisional ballots and think to themselves, well, you know, 2/3 of them are going to have to break towards Kerry.
All right. Ellen Ratner, Michelle Malkin, thank you both.
Well, voters now have had the last official word after the politicians, pollsters, and pundits. What will the media say about this election? What will the postscript be? A look at the morning buzz in just a moment. Stay with us. is a Fox News alert. Fox News is projecting that John Thune is going to be the projected winner in South Dakota, defeating longstanding Senator Tom Daschle. You can see him here meeting with his supporters, thanking them, and again expressing his delight at what is tonight a victory for John Thune, who has defeated Tom Daschle.
Now for a reaction from Ohio, Jeff Goldblatt is in Cleveland. Jeff. All right. Jeff Goldblatt, we're having some audio problems from you, buddy, so hang on, we'll try to fix that. But this with John Thune is historic. I mean, it's been 52 years since something like this has happened, where the Senate Minority Leader has actually been knocked out of the Senate. And this is a case where Tom Daschle, they knew he had a tough run against this gentleman, and indeed, he lost. We're calling this as a Thune win. Absolutely.
We want to bring in now some guests who are going to talk to us more about the fallout from this election at this point. We are particularly interested in what the newspaper headlines are going to be this morning and what we're going to be talking about around the water cooler. Let's ask a couple of radio talk show hosts joining us now from Seattle. Mike Siegel, a conservative, and in Los Angeles, Paul McGuire, a liberal. Gentlemen, welcome. Nice to have you here.
Good morning. How you doing?
Let me ask you if one of the first big things that we're going to be talking about are the exit polls. Let's weigh in with our conservative talk show host to weigh in on that, because so many people were looking at those exit polls saying that this was going to be a John Kerry victory.
That's absolutely right.
The exit polls,
and unfortunately, the exit polls were not correct. The exit polls turned out to be much more deceptive to the Kerry campaign. And by the way, with those reports coming out on the East Coast, to those of us here on the West Coast, before our polls closed, that's very troubling, because it means that the exit polls, number one, were misleading to begin with, and number two, might have affected what happened on the West Coast. There was talk, as you know, a number of years ago about the fact that maybe there shouldn't be reporting to the West Coast of the country or to time zones where the polls were still open, and only open up those conversations in time zones where the polls were closed. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So now these exit polls have the double effect of causing a problem in terms of what the Kerry campaign thought, and then creates a heightened expectation. And now, because of that, the followers of Kerry, and I think the Kerry campaign you were just talking about, feels compelled that it has to go forward to some degree. And so with that having happened, plus the West Coast hearing about this as well, I think it created some serious problems that, frankly, these exit polls are not scientific. And they try to back it up, by the way, by making phone calls to people at home. And when they find people who had voted by absentee ballot to cover those people, they talk to them.
Let's
but
jump
the fact
in here.
is, that's not
scientific.
scientific.
Let's give Paul a chance now to respond to the drama over these exit polls. Paul?
Well, Mike is right. The exit polls are definitely not scientific. Kerry's supporters thought that this was going to be a win for Kerry. But overwhelmingly, it looks like George W. Bush is going to be the next president of the United States of America. And I think, quite frankly, it's time for John Kerry and his campaign to concede the election. George W. Bush has the electoral vote, the popular vote. We're just waiting for some states to come in. I think it's very clear that George W. Bush has won this presidency, and it's time for John Kerry and John Edwards to concede.
Well, I think Paul has a great deal of common sense there, but there's one other part of this that nobody's really been talking about in the media, and that is the provisional votes. We here in the state of Washington had a problem this evening with the voting because of provisional votes, where people from MoveOn.org actually went to homes of people who hadn't voted, not asking whether they were registered, and then bringing them to the polls in order to get them to vote by provisional vote. The fact of the matter is that, as you heard Ed Gillespie say earlier, maybe 25% of those are going to be valid anyway. There's no mathematical way that with the provisional votes there can be even the insurmountable lead that the president has matched by John Kerry. It can't be done. So why even bother going forward with that? I think Paul's absolutely right.
Paul, let me ask you about the projected great divide that we talked a lot about in the media that was taking place across the country, this polarization. What do you think has to happen now in order to move forward from this and help the country heal?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that. You know, regarding somebody like Michael Moore, who I don't agree with, I have never accused Michael Moore of being unpatriotic. Regarding John Kerry's platform, John Kerry is obviously patriotic. I think we need to move forward and find common ground. There's been a great debate over whether we should be in Iraq or not, but clearly the mandate of the American people is behind George W. Bush. We need to support him, but also we need to find areas of common ground and stand together, united as Americans, and move forward. I think that's the goal for America in the next 4 years.
Mike, were your listeners really polarized from what you could determine over these last few weeks about the issues, and was there a real level of concern about the way this campaign was conducted?
There was, particularly on, frankly, for my listeners on the Democratic side, and some of the ways in which people feared that there were going to be attempts to get people provisional votes or get people voting who were not legally registered. That's why the Republicans' response was, we're going to have attorneys out there, and we're going to make sure that those votes are legal and proper. Everybody who's legally entitled to vote should vote, but people who are not should not be able to do that. I think, though, that the media have a big role to play in this. It's not just the president. The mainstream media, and I'm not talking about Fox here, but certainly CBS, we now know, ABC and Mark Halperin and the political director at ABC and the memo that he wrote to downplay John Kerry's faults and to play up the president's faults. These are things that the media are going to have to look in the mirror about because they helped to create the divisiveness. The fact of the matter is, the American people said the #1 issue was the moral questions, dealing with marriage, dealing with those kinds of issues. And I think at the bottom line, the media need to recognize that and need to recognize that the president does tap into that resource.
All right, we're going to have to leave the discussion there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us with your perspective. We appreciate it.
The big prize tonight appears to be Ohio. Let's get reaction from Jeff Goldblatt. He is live in Cleveland. Jeff.
Hi, Bob. It's one thing, and it's pretty understandable that the media is up at this hour, and we're describing to people why things are going down the way they are. But then again, Fox News projected Ohio to go red for President Bush about midnight. So why then is the chairman of the Republican Party walking out of the Cuyahoga Board of Elections at this hour? I'm going to pose that question right now to Bob Bennett. And, sir, we're getting ready to go on, and I saw you walk out, so explain it all to me when you definitely have told me several hours earlier that you won this state.
Well, we did win the state as I was performing my duties as chairman of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. We were reconciling the reports that were coming in from the precinct prior to sending down the final unofficial result to the Secretary of State. This is a bookkeeping procedure that was going through. It was done with the Democrat and the Republican members of the board. It didn't change any of the unofficial results, and it wouldn't until the official. So this was the only reason that we're staying around here. And the other boards, major boards in Ohio, are doing the same thing. The Secretary of State wants the final results in, so they report them. I guess the Kerry campaign has raised some question about whether all the ballots have been in and counted. So I think that's what the interest of the Secretary of State is, to get all those results in.
Do you know how many outstanding provisional and absentee ballots are going to be out there? And will that margin be enough that it could be legally challenged to a point where things might turn out to be something different?
Look, it appears to me that the margin of victory for President Bush in Ohio is going to be about 150,000. I would expect that the provisional ballots would not approach that figure, although I would expect that they will go maybe 100, 125,000 in the state. That would mean that Senator Kerry would have to get 100% of the provisional ballots plus any ballots that might be coming in from overseas or anything like that in order to win an election in Ohio. That's just not going to happen.
And that's also presuming that all the provisional ballots are good.
That's why that's the other thing. That would presume that they're all good. And we know, for instance, that based upon the Illinois, where they've already used the HAVA ballots, that you count anywhere from 7 to 20%, even if you count maybe 25% of these, it might be high. But keep in mind also that Ohio has provisional ballots for change of address and everything, although most of those were picked up during the intense registration drives by the two parties.
Given the margin of difference for President Bush at this hour, are you still anticipating a legal armada from the Democratic Party to descend upon the Buckeye State?
I have to tell you that based upon this election, Democrats have filed a lot of challenges in courts. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a few more coming.
And how have you prepared yourself for that onslaught?
Well, as I think you know, as I've stated again, the boards of elections in Ohio are bipartisan. You have 2 Democrat, 2 Republican board members. The procedures, the employees are evenly divided. They have procedures. They work in teams. They act as a checks and balance. We'll have a good count procedure here. I don't think you're going to have to worry about the election results in Ohio.
Bob Bennett, chairman of Ohio's Republican Party, thanks so much and congratulations, and thanks for making our live shot at this early morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So there you go, from the chairman himself. He in no way suggesting that this state is going to go to the Kerry campaign, as they are still kind of holding out hope up there in Boston. That's the latest from here in Cleveland. I'm Jeff Goldblatt. Now back to you in New York.
Jeff, thank you.
Well, both candidates fought hard for New Mexico's 5 electoral votes. And at this hour, the state is still too close to call. And we've been told that President Bush may be coming out to speak with supporters if New Mexico and Nevada go into his win column. And once those races are called, Trace Gallagher is live in Santa Fe, New Mexico with the very latest. Trace, what can you tell us?
Yeah. Well, good morning, Uma. I can tell you right now, it doesn't look like New Mexico is going to be called anytime soon. Now, the senior senator from this state, Pete Domenici, he's a Republican. He called it about 45 minutes ago for President Bush. The problem is nobody else followed suit, and there's a reason for that, because the numbers here just haven't quite jibed all night long. I mean, we had President Bush just about 45 minutes ago leading 52% to 47% with 98% of the precincts counted. Well, now with 99%, the Secretary of State has kind of updated those numbers, and now we've got a dogfight again, saying that President Bush is only leading by 3,000 votes, 50% to 49%. Now, the big question here is how many votes are still outstanding? And part of the problem is nobody's quite sure. I mean, we had 400,000, nearly half of all the registered voters who voted actually voted prior to Election Day. That's with absentee ballots. It's also with these early voting ballots, and no one has quite gotten a beat on how many ballots are out there. We've talked to different counties. We've talked to the Secretary of State. We think there are some 20,000 ballots that have yet to be counted. So about an hour ago, if you did the math, there was no way that John Kerry could make up the difference. Well, now with the new numbers and you do the math, there is right now a toss-up. John Kerry could clearly come back. That's why nobody is calling this right now. We can tell you that President Bush did very well here with Hispanic voters. John Kerry traditionally, and Democrats traditionally, carry 2/3 or more of Hispanic voters. During this election, President Bush carried 44%. It is a number nobody thought he would achieve, and that might be the number to put him over the top. But if, in fact, New Mexico is called for President Bush, it would give him enough over that electoral vote threshold from 269 to 274, given that Ohio is in fact his. We are all waiting right now for these final votes to be tallied. We do not think it will happen until probably sometime mid-morning today, I guess, in New Mexico and in New York. Uma?
All right, Trace Gallagher, thank you for bringing us up to date. As you point out, a dogfight underway for those electoral votes. Thanks for joining us.
This election not just about the presidency, of course. Fox's Brian Wilson has a look at some of the Senate races we've been following around the country.
It was a very good night for the Republicans in the U.S. Senate. The GOP added seats to what was a razor-thin margin. Most of the competitive races went Republican. In Oklahoma, Republican Tom Coburn, a former House member, very conservative, defeats Democratic Congressman Brad Carson. In South Carolina, Republican Jim DeMint carried the day, defeating Democrat Inez Tenenbaum, a net gain for the GOP in a seat currently occupied by Fritz Hollings. In Kentucky, incumbent Republican Jim Bunning dodged a bullet in a very close race. He defeated State Senator and Dr. Daniel Mongiardo. Republican Congressman Richard Burr defeated former Clinton Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles in North Carolina, picking up John Edwards' old seat. Republican Congressman David Vitter needed more than 50% in Louisiana to carry the day and avoid a runoff, and he got it, a seat currently occupied by Democrat John Breaux. Democrats did pull off a victory in Colorado, where State Attorney General Ken Salazar beat beer magnate Pete Coors, and it was no surprise surprise, but Barack Obama picked up a Republican seat in Illinois. So even with other Senate races in the air, Republicans strengthened their position in the Senate. There was never any doubt they would grow their majority in the House of Representatives. In Washington, Brian Wilson, Fox News.
Well, despite dozens of visits from President Bush, John Kerry won Pennsylvania tonight. Fox's David Lee Miller has reaction now from Harrisburg.
Authorities in Pennsylvania say there was an historically high voter turnout, and it appears to be to the advantage of John Kerry, who has won the state. This was a very hard-fought battleground. President Bush came to Pennsylvania some 44 times. John Kerry campaigned here 22 times. The two campaigns spent in excess of $45 million advertising in the state. John Kerry brought in some of the big Democratic guns, among them Bruce Springsteen, and this was the first stop for President Clinton once he left his sick bed. There were a number of glitches during the voting. A number of the provisional ballots ran short at a number of polling stations. There are also reports of problems with a small number of the electronic voting machines. And in the city of Philadelphia, Republicans there are challenging absentee ballots. And for now, at least, they are not being counted until the outcome of a court hearing. And in another statewide development, Republican Senator Arlen Specter has won re-election to a fifth term, beating out his opponent, Democrat Joe Huffle, a three-time congressman from the Philadelphia area. That race was much closer than some had expected. But the big story here in the state of Pennsylvania is that the Keystone State's 21 electoral votes will go to Democrat John Kerry. In Harrisburg, David Lee Miller, Fox News.
Well, President Bush is the projected winner of Ohio, but it may not be over yet. John Kerry's campaign manager released a statement earlier this evening. She says, quote, "The vote count in Ohio has not been completed. There are more than 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We believe when they are, John Kerry will win Ohio," end quote. Is Ohio this year's Florida? If so, Major Garrett has the details on how things may shake out.
Fox News has called Ohio for President Bush, but if the final results in the Buckeye State are razor thin, there could be the prospect, however remote, of either a mandatory recount, the counting of provisional ballots, or some potential litigation. Let's take these issues in order. Ohio state law requires a recount if the margin of victory is 1/4 of 1%. The next potential point of interest, provisional ballots. Now, these are ballots cast by a voter who went to the polls but was not on the registration lists. But these ballots will only be counted if the margin of victory for the president is smaller than the aggregate number of provisional ballots. And state officials tell Fox they will not know the total number of provisional ballots until sometime Wednesday morning. The provisional ballots will first be checked to verify the vote is from a legally registered voter, and then and only then will that vote be counted. There could also be litigation over Republican efforts to challenge voter registration lists, but that is not only a legal long shot, but the least likely scenario for a challenge to the Ohio presidential outcome. Lastly, it's important to note that about 70% of Ohio's projected 6 million votes this election year will be cast on punch card ballots. But unlike Florida, Ohio is not fearful of the return of the Chad. Ohio has a statewide standard for counting punch card ballots. The vote is registered if the Chad is perforated cleanly in 2 places. You remember each Florida county had its own punch card standards, which is how we all learned the intricacies of pregnant and dimpled Chads. If there is an Ohio recount, there may be other issues, but Chads are not likely to be among them. In Washington, Major Garrett, Fox News.
Perhaps we can take a look now at those numbers coming out of Ohio and let you know that a statement has been made by the 2 senators in Ohio. These are U.S. senators. We're talking Mike DeWine and George Voinovich, who are urging Mr. Kerry to concede. Based on their experience in Ohio with Ohio politics, they believe the president's lead in Ohio is clear and that it cannot be surmounted. As we look, these are the numbers. That quote I read you where the statement from Kerry's campaign manager saying there are 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We have nothing that verifies that. In fact, it looks like there may be in the order of 130, 140,000, possibly, those being the provisional ballots and maybe some absentee, but nothing like 250. And these gentlemen, the senators from Ohio itself, are saying concede, and that's their recommendation.
And the members of the Kerry camp, John Kerry himself, also they're huddled up behind closed doors, and as Kelly Wright pointed out earlier tonight, that we should not be expecting any statement from John Kerry until about 10 o'clock this morning. Okay, a presidential election has an impact on foreign capitals as well as America. We're going to take a look at overseas reaction in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody, to our early morning coverage of You Decide 2004. U.S. troops in Iraq were able to watch live television coverage of the election as they awoke this morning. The soldiers and Marines, of course, are right in the middle of the central issue of this big campaign. Greg Palcott joins us now live by video phone. He's embedded near Fallujah with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Greg, I know that you're there with the troops who are ready to prepare for an assault in that region. Bring us up to date.
Absolutely right, Uma. The Marines here are getting ready for a possible full-scale ground assault on that terror hotbed of Fallujah. So I must admit to you, number one on their minds is not the U.S. elections, but maybe it's number two. And they've been taking it in. There was a live television feed brought in at the dining facility at another base near us. So the troops there, the Marines there, were able to watch the returns and either be happy or sad about what they were seeing. And they were hearing about it here on the base, too. We were getting some information over the Internet and passing it on to the Marines here. And in fact, there's 1.4 million military, and many of them are participating in this election. They see it as a very, very important event in their lives, of course. We've got 2 Marines here, Uma, that we can chat with very briefly and get their opinions on it. We have Private First Class Brandon Francis. You're from College Station, Texas, right?
Yes, sir.
So you're a local boy. President Bush, it appears that he's trending towards a victory. Would that be a good or a bad thing in your view?
That would be a good thing in my view.
Why?
Just the beliefs on it and stuff. From what I've seen and what I've heard about what's going on in the election and stuff, it just...
But for you, would that be a good thing to have him in there or a bad thing?
Probably a good thing, just because of where I stand and stuff, being in the military and the things that I've heard about what he wants to do and stuff like that.
Very good. Also, Uma, we've got Corporal Tony Rosendahl from Oceanside, California. As we've been reporting, California trending towards the Democratic candidate. But what's your feeling on it? Who's your man in this vote?
I'm going for Bush.
Why would that be?
Just because he takes care of his military.
Now, the polls say also that soldiers are behind the way the war on terror has been prosecuted. Would you agree with that?
Not really.
No, why?
Because we're here doing our job and doing it well.
But it says that you're in favor of that, so basically you agree with that idea.
Yes.
Okay. Those are views of 2 Marines, Uma. I mean, in the fair and balanced mode here, I must say that there are, according to surveys, 19% of the military in the Democratic column. There are Kerry supporters in the ranks, and I even talked to one Marine who did a write-in vote for Hillary Clinton, believe it or not. So there is a spread of opinion here, but apparently we have two votes in the President Bush column standing alongside of me here at a Marine base near Fallujah in Iraq. Back to you in New York.
Greg Palcott, thank you so much for bringing us that diversity of opinion out there. And of course, we wish our troops all the best. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date.
The elections here in America come about a month after Afghanistan's first election. That, of course, a direct result of the U.S. war on terror, a major issue in the campaign. Scott Heiler joining us live by video phone from Kabul, Afghanistan. Hi, Scott.
Hey there, Bob. Yeah, as you say, it might not be over there, but a presidential election here in Afghanistan is finally over. And at a press conference earlier today, it was made official. A body who is looking into some voter fraud has said that, yes, it wasn't a perfect election, but it was perfect enough. And later on this afternoon, in probably about 2 hours' time, it will be made official that Afghan President Hamid Karzai will keep his job as the top spot. This historic election obviously took place on October 9th, as you said. Hamid Karzai got 55% of the vote out of a field of 17 other candidates. The official announcement, again, in about 2 hours' time, will be more of a photo opportunity. It won't be a press conference, a give and take, but that's to come in the next few hours. And obviously, this is a huge sigh of relief. Finally, after 25 days, we've been waiting for this announcement, and it's done. We can move forward. He can name his cabinet, and obviously, this is good news for the war on terror. And to the election on your side of the world, but the reaction here and how things are going here for Americans in Kabul. It was an early morning. The U.S. Embassy held a breakfast at 6:30 this morning where about 1,000 of the 1,000 who are here, Americans who are here in Kabul, joined for a breakfast. Probably about 200, 300 showed up for it. It was actually in a double wide because most of the U.S. Embassy is under construction, so this has been temporary housing. And I have to tell you, it was about 50-50 split. I'm not sure if some Kerry fans or Kerry supporters were a little bit reluctant to cheer at the appropriate times because it was the embassy, but it seemed to be about 50-50 split. But I can tell you that throughout the day they'll be checking in because they had to all go to work before any of the real election results on your side of the world came in. Back to you, Bob, in New York.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, it is 4:48 here in the morning on the East Coast, and already overseas markets, though, are reacting to the news of the U.S. election returns because those markets are open. We're going to take a close look at those numbers when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a very interesting election as the voting continues. The vote count continues at this hour. Joining us now to wrap all of this up in Washington, we have former Republican Congressman Bob Dornan. He's now the host of a radio talk show, and from San Francisco, and left-leaning radio talk show host Bernie Ward. Gentlemen, nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning to all of you. Bernie, give me a sense of what you think right now is playing out in Ohio. We've got some of the senators there saying that John Kerry should just go ahead and concede Ohio and move forward. What do you think about this?
Are those Republican or Democratic senators?
We're told
they're both Republican.
Yeah, both Republican.
Okay,
both
that makes
from
sense.
Ohio.
That makes sense then. Of course they're going to say concede. That would be the exact thing they would do. If you've got 250,000 provisional ballots and if Bush is up by 125 to 130,000, then Kerry would be crazy not to make sure that those are all counted before this thing is officially signed off on. It doesn't do him any good to sit there and see all of these votes that haven't been counted yet and to find out after the fact that in reality he might have won the state. So we're in no hurry. The Secretary of State said they're going to count them. They said they have an orderly procedure for them. They have a uniform standard. So let them count them. And then if in the end George Bush wins Ohio, then George Bush is president of the United States.
Bob Dornan, how do you read the activity today?
Well, I think that with the popular vote going to the president, over 3 million, that Kerry and all of the Democrat lawyers are making a big mistake if they don't show the whole world, particularly the vicious press against Bush in Europe, that we can do a graceful election and that we can be, ladies and gentlemen, in the morning. Here's the problem. My classmate, we both came to Congress in the same class of 76, Gephardt, Quayle, myself, and Al Gore. I was never angry at Al. A big mistake he made was not to recount the whole state of Florida. He might have won. Some people think he was, but he cherry-picked Democratic counties along the coast, and that was his big mistake. But he had every right holding the electoral college at bay for a while because he won the popular vote by 500,000. Well, Bush has 6 times that number, over 3 million. Kerry will just end this whole thing in a horrible way if a team, a phalanx of lawyers drags this out.
All right, we will see what lies ahead. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We've got to move on. There is no official winner yet, but it's looking pretty good for President Bush at this hour.
So how are the Europeans reacting to that news as they wake up this morning? Dana Lewis joins us live from Paris. Dana.
Hi, Bob. You can imagine in a country where 71% in pre-election polling here, if they could vote, said they would not vote for President Bush, that there's not a lot of joy or celebration on the street here. I can tell you it's interesting. While you all have been so careful to deal with the numbers here, on French radio and French television, they've essentially said that President Bush has got it. I was over at a party at the Intercontinental Hotel this morning. Was a live broadcast of a 24-hour news channel called LCI, and they said, another 4 years of President Bush. They are certainly reporting the controversy. They are certainly reporting and talking about the slim margin in Ohio. So that's going out on French television and radio. But on the street, people are already saying, looks like we've got President Bush again running the world in some of the comments to us. As they put it, they say it's disappointing that American voters didn't hear what the French said, because the French disagree so deeply with the way President Bush has run his foreign policy. And I think there's a bit of surprise here that on the French side, a lot of them have seen President Bush one way and American voters another way, and they're telling us on the street, well, suddenly there isn't this big gap in perhaps the voting public. There's a lot of division, but they recognize now that he has a tremendous amount of support, and there are some people who agree with his foreign policy. I talked to a U.S. Embassy official here this morning who said, you know, conditions diplomatically with the French have been miserable, certainly over the last year or two, and they are now saying, look, number one, they are telling the French you're going to have to deal with this. Number two, perhaps it is a good thing in terms of diplomatic relations now, because the French will realize that President Bush, if this holds, is there to stay, and they will re-engage the Americans. And here, in the diplomatic community, there is some joy over that, Bob.
Thank you very much, Dana Lewis. Now, overseas markets could possibly rise or fall with America's election returns. Fox News Business Channel's correspondent Dagan McDowell has been following the numbers, and she joins us now. Dagan, what should we expect this morning?
You can see a lot of green when Wall Street gets back to work this morning, Bob. Wall Street wanted to wake up Wednesday morning to a clear winner in the presidential race. It looks like that won't happen. However, stocks could still take off with President Bush poised to stay in the White House. Stock futures currently trading overseas indicate a higher opening here in the States, even though the election has not been called yet. The Dow could see a triple-digit gain when the buying begins about 4.5 hours from now. The European markets have been open almost 2 hours, and stocks across the pond moving up. In London, the FTSE gaining 26 points. The main stock index in France up 17. Germany's DAX climbing 23 points, although those markets showing some caution. In the Asian markets overnight, investors stepped up to start buying when President Bush jumped ahead of John Kerry in the early vote counts. It's no secret that investors like this president. Bush is seen as more friendly to business, and his tax cuts, particularly those on capital gains and dividends, gave a big boost to the market. And stocks here in the States hit the skids on Tuesday when early exit polls that popped up on the internet showed strength for John Kerry. The blue chips ended Tuesday in the red after being up as much as 70 points earlier in the day. Investors also get skittish when the White House changes hands. They have to get used to a new leader and a whole new set of policies. Wall Street does not like that uncertainty. And historically, the blue chips have gotten a nice bounce when the incumbent or the incumbent party wins, climbing more than 2% on average from Election Day to the end of the year when looking back at the last 100 years. Now, when Republican incumbents keep the White House, the Dow does even better, jumping almost 6%. But we'll have to wait and see if this election doesn't wrap up. That could weigh on the markets, but it looks like the stocks will open higher when trading kicks off later.
Dagan McDowell, thank you very much, and we appreciate you being with us this hour. We've got Fox and Friends coming up for continuing coverage of You Decide 2004.
The votes are still being tallied. We invite you to stay with us with our continuing coverage.
Also, President Bush could possibly appear this morning if the votes indeed stay the way they look right now. He could have a victory speech later. Of course, we'll bring that to you if it happens. Stay tuned for Fox and Friends.
Okay, you hit the alarm, 5 o'clock Eastern Time. So you're waking up, hoping to know who the next president is? Oops, hit the snooze button. Because while this election is almost a done deal, some are wondering whether Ohio could be the new Florida.
What we're going to give you is a solid tabulation when we give it to you. If it takes 2 hours, 2 days, or 2 weeks, the result that we give you will be a good result that the voters of the state of Ohio can have confidence in.
We'll fill you in over the next 4 hours on this special edition of Fox and Friends on what's going on in Ohio and tell you what each side is saying about this Ohio debate that's going on right now in America. It's time for Fox and Friends.
You Decide 2004, Election Night. Now, reporting live from Fox News Election Headquarters in New York, Brit Hume.
Tricked you.
And he has morphed into Mike Jerrick and Kiran Chetry. It takes two of us to be Brit Hume.
Absolutely. Good to see you. 5 a.m. Eastern Time. Did you think, well, I went to bed around 11:30 p.m. last night. Did you think we were going to have a winner this morning?
Yes, I actually did. I got sucked in. I got pulled in thinking that we would have a decision, but we don't.
No, we're about one electoral vote away, according to some estimates, and we're going to bring you all the tallies in just a second. We want to let you know who we're going to talk to coming up on the show.
Florida Congressman Mark Foley is one of the people we'll be talking to. Also, Georgia Senator Saxby Chambliss is going to be here.
Fred Barnes, Mort Kondracki coming to break this down for us. And Barack Obama, boy, did he pull out quite a win.
Well, let's see, by about 76% of the vote in the state of Illinois. But everybody knew that was going to be a runaway, and Barack Obama is the winner in Illinois.
All right.
People say that 40 is the new 30, Brown is the new black. Ohio is the new Florida, possibly.
At least Florida's not the new Florida. I think there's a collective sigh of relief down there because things did go well in Florida. President Bush projected the winner quite early after the polls
It went well
closed.
for him, yes.
Yes, it did.
Yes.
But I'm saying the voting process went well this year for Florida.
Not too many screw-ups.
Let's get you up to date, though, on exactly what we're looking at right now. According to our count, President Bush has 269 electoral votes. Senator John Kerry with 242. And as we know, you need 270 for an electoral victory. The races that are still too close to call: Wisconsin, Iowa, New Mexico, and Nevada. We're projecting right now President Bush the winner in Ohio. The Kerry campaign so far, though, refusing to admit defeat there. And the interesting thing, we heard so much in the 2000 election about hanging chads, pregnant chads. This year's buzzword for this situation in Ohio could be the provisional ballot. After a new federal law passed in 2002, this could be the key issue as we look to Ohio and the provisional ballot situation.
Yeah, and I think our Jeff Goldblatt's going to explain that a little bit more, but we think that right now in Ohio, President Bush is up by about 150,000 votes. And the word we're getting is that there are about 250,000 provisional ballots. So they would have to be, over the next 10 days, they would have to check them out, see who's eligible, which ones will get kicked out. Let's say all of them are accepted, 100% of them. There's 125,000 of them. And then 100% all go for Senator Kerry. That still leaves him short, a lot of people believe.
Right.
Now, the president said he was going to come down and give a speech, an acceptance speech, if Nevada could be called or projected, and New Mexico. New Mexico is the problem. Boy, this was, it looked like President Bush was pulling away in New Mexico about an hour and a half ago, but now it is extremely tight.
No, and here's the latest with New Mexico, at least the word that we're getting. The Secretary of State and the staff there went home for the night. They say they're going to resume their ballot counting tomorrow morning at about 9 a.m. Eastern. That's about 4 hours from now. But before they left, they said there were thousands of absentee ballots there that have to be examined by hand, and then also the provisional ballot situation there, they say, will go through regardless of the outcome. And there were a couple of news organizations calling New Mexico for the president, but the Secretary of State there not prepared to make any type of call.
Hey, Matt, do you have the numbers for Pennsylvania and Florida, the specifics, or do you want to go out to Cleveland? Because I know Jeff is probably ready to go now. Let's get out to Jeff Goldblatt right now so he can explain this provisional situation for us and the state of Ohio. Jeff, what's going on?
Hey, I hope you're going to give me a lot of time to explain this here, Mike. Good morning to all you guys. If I don't explain it, just come back and fire with the question, because there's a lot to go through. First of all, let's start with more of the obvious, at least from the Republican perspective, and that is that this state is done. They're saying it's red, it's George Bush. Do not listen in any way, shape, or form to the Kerry people and their claims that this state can still go to the Democrats. They say the math it doesn't work. So first of all, let's look at some things or some strategies as to why the Republicans feel they really do have this state. And we projected this state at about midnight, but we were getting signs from Republican operatives that it was going to trend to the Republicans about an hour earlier. And the reason why, they were looking at this county in particular. This is Cuyahoga County. This is a Democratic stronghold. And we're not just talking about this election here, but most elections. The Democrats have to get such a solid base here in order to offset Republican gains in your more rural and conservative areas. And the target number we were given that the Republicans said that the Democrats could not eclipse was 250,000 votes. And we looked at that early on, and there was no way that they were going to get to that number. And sure enough, John Kerry only beat George Bush in this county by about 18,000 votes. Then you raise the issue of provisional ballots. Let's now explain what provisional ballots are all about. After the debacle in Florida, Congress passed new voting legislation, which essentially says if you go to the polls and you believe you are eligible to vote and you're not on the precinct rolls, you can cast what is called a provisional ballot. that ballot is then only counted after the fact or after the election day if it is so needed. In other words, that provisional ballot total might make or break the election. Now, there are different numbers out there floating around as to how big the provisional ballot total is coupled with the absentee ballot total and the overseas ballots and the military ballots. And this is where you get the difference. We understand from the Kerry campaign, I think I heard you, Mike, float about 250,000. Then we just talked to the chairman of Ohio's Republican Party, and he told us that number is probably about 120,000 or so total. And then we're hearing from Ohio's Republican Secretary of State, Ken Blackwell, that he estimates that total to be about 175,000. Keep in mind that in the 2000 election, George Bush beat Al Gore by 145,000 votes. So then you look at this total of provisional ballots and absentee ballots and everything else, and the way the Republican Party is spinning it at this point, or telling us, is that pretty much John Kerry would have to win every single one of those outstanding votes in order to take the state, which they say is downright impossible if you look at statistical models. And so that's why they say Ohio is in the bag for President Bush. Back to you in New York.
All right, Jeff Goldblatt, thanks so much. We do want to let you know what Kerry's campaign manager, Mary Beth Cahill, was saying about it. She says, the quote there is that the vote count in Ohio has not yet been completed. There are more than 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We believe when they are, John Kerry will win Ohio.
Right.
Both senators from the state have actually sent a letter to the Kerry camp saying, just concede that you lost because, you know, this state, judging from all the models that we're getting, all the information, there's just no way John Kerry can win Ohio.
Of course, Senator Edwards came out and said we owe it to all of our supporters to count every single vote. Now, the Republican representative in the state of Ohio, as Jeff mentioned, has the numbers a little bit different. He says it's about 150,000 difference between the President Bush and Senator Kerry as far as the general election, the votes are concerned. And he says they're about 125,000 provisional ballots that need to be counted over the next 10 days.
And we had talked about this so much, about just what it was going to come down to and how small a margin, and we're still waiting to hear, as we said, on 4 states, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nevada, and New Mexico. And when we look at this breakdown here, in Wisconsin, it's a matter of 11,000 votes so far. In Iowa, a matter of 14,000. And in New Mexico, a matter of 3,600 right now, with almost all the precincts in.
They did have a problem in 2 counties in Iowa, Greene and Harrison counties, and they're not going to be able to get a final total in Iowa probably until tomorrow. Let's get out to Mike Emanuel, though. He's at the White House. And have we heard any word from the president? Will he come down in the next hour or so?
At this point, Mike, it's not sounding like he will. The scene here at the White House is that the motorcade has been ready to go whenever President Bush has been ready to go. We know Bush-Cheney campaign officials have been convinced that the president has carried the state of Ohio. Our understanding has been that the president wanted to wait for more conclusive numbers out of New Mexico and Nevada before speaking to supporters across town at the Reagan building. But we've been anticipating whenever the president actually speaks, he will declare victory, convinced that he has won this election. The last time we saw President Bush and the First Family was about 7 hours ago when the president invited cameras up into the residence here at the White House to record him watching returns. At that point, the president appeared upbeat, pretty relaxed as he monitored election returns with the First Lady, his daughters, his parents, and other family members. Mr. Bush said to reporters in the room at that point, quote, "I believe I will win. Thank you very much." Of course, the history in Ohio is no Republican has ever won the White House without carrying the Buckeye State. Let's take a look at the latest numbers we have out of the state of Ohio. Bush-Cheney campaign officials say the number of outstanding provisional ballots, and there are the numbers on your screen. We have it 51-48 with President Bush with 2.791 million votes to Senator Kerry with 2.653 votes. Bush-Cheney campaign officials say the number of outstanding provisional ballots in Ohio will not make up for Senator Kerry's margin of defeat. One strategist calling Kerry holding out hope for Ohio a desperate ploy. President Bush invested a great deal of time and energy in the Buckeye State, visiting 41 times by our count, including a stop in Columbus on Election Day. Let's take a look at the map of the United States broken down into red states and blue states. For President Bush, much of the map looks the same as it did 4 years ago, one exception being the state of New Hampshire, which went with its neighbor, Senator John Kerry, out of the state of Massachusetts. And there is the map of the red and blue states on your screen. Florida to President Bush. We've declared Ohio for President Bush, as have some others. And a lot of the other states, red states, as they were 4 years ago. But there are still some outstanding states, and the president, we understand, has been waiting for some more conclusive numbers out of some of those remaining states. So despite the early hour, there's a flurry of activity still here at the White House. We've been waiting for the president to go across town to the Reagan building to speak to supporters. At this point, we're not anticipating he will be doing that anytime soon. Back to you guys in New York.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, Mike Emanuel, thanks so much. We have some information coming to us from Fox, from Carl Cameron, actually, saying that Congressman Rob Portman told Fox News that if Nevada and New Mexico are called for President Bush, he will speak today, this morning, now. But if not, then he possibly might wait. And as we talked about, New Mexico's Secretary of State said they're done at least counting until about 9 o'clock this morning. That's
Fox News Channel has projected Nevada, but we cannot project New Mexico yet. So, okay, we've got to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to check in with our Kelly Wright down, well, in Boston with the Kerry campaign. So, coming right back.
We're going to give you a look right now. 3 states election results in Michigan going to John Kerry by a margin of 51% to 48%. 91% of the precincts in there.
In the state of New Jersey, this was a little bit of a contest, much tighter than some people said. Then expanded to a bigger victory for Kerry than the polls said in the last 24 hours. 53% for Senator Kerry.
There is Wisconsin. We got 99% of the precincts reporting. And Wisconsin, one of those states too close to call, according to our latest estimates at 4 a.m. Kerry by 11,395 votes only, with 98%.
We had a check mark there. Have things changed?
No, I think there wasn't a check mark there yet. I think we're still waiting on Wisconsin.
Jersey. Oh, I'm sorry. New Jersey popped up again. Okay. And I misspoke a little while ago. I said that we had declared Nevada, and absolutely not. The 4 that we have not here at Fox News Channel projected: Iowa, Wisconsin, New Mexico, and Nevada. Let's get out to Kelly Wright.
Kelly Wright standing by in Boston at John Kerry's headquarters there, and I'm sure the topic on everybody's mind, Ohio, this morning.
Ohio is the operative way, O-H-I-O, but let me see if I can paint the picture this way. I was here throughout most of the night and actually saw an estimated crowd of 30,000 or more gathered here at Copley Square in front of the Boston Public Library, awaiting word from John Kerry to come out and speak to them, win or lose. Instead, throughout the evening, closer towards 3 a.m. this morning, the Democratic presidential candidate's running mate, John Edwards, actually came out to address the crowd shortly before 3 a.m. to thank the die-hard supporters.
It's been a long night, but we've waited 4 years for this victory. We can wait one more night. Tonight, John and I are so proud of all of you who are here with us and all of you across the country who have stood with us in this campaign. John Kerry and I made a promise to the American people that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted. Tonight, we are keeping our word and we will fight for every vote. You deserve no less. Thank you.
Senator Edwards vowing to make sure that every vote counts. Speaking, of course, about Ohio. Ohio state election officials say there are only 143,000 provisional and overseas ballots in Ohio. And since the president's margin of victory is so close to that number, as we heard Jeff Goldblatt explain, it is a mathematically impossibility of declaring victory because of that, and for Kerry to win Ohio. But the Kerry camp is not conceding anything at this point. Ohio Republican Senators Mike DeWine and George Voinovich issued the following statement about the Election Day drama unfolding in the Buckeye State. They said, quote, based on our experience in Ohio politics, we believe that the president's lead in Ohio is clear and that it cannot be surmounted. Senator Kerry should concede defeat and spare the country the turmoil of another drawn-out election. And as we know, that is the situation here. We expect some word from the Kerry camp around 10 a.m. this morning. That is the operative word right now, 10 a.m. We'll be looking forward to hearing from the Kerry camp about this Ohio situation. Back to you guys in New York.
Thank you, Kelly, very much. Well, America voted, and there is still no official winner in the race for the presidency. Joining me for a fair and balanced debate now, from Tampa, Florida, the Republican strategist Chris Ingram, and from D.C. is Democratic strategist Sasha Burns. Sasha, just talked to you over the weekend. Good to see you again.
Great to see you, Mike.
And Chris, good to have you with us. Chris, are you pretty happy right now?
Yes, I'm very happy. It's a great day to be a Republican. Certainly President Bush is on the road to victory. Tom Daschle getting defeated, Mel Martinez getting elected here in Florida, Johnny Isakson in Georgia. We can go on and on. It's a good day to be a Republican.
Sasha, did you get sucked in by that exit polling and the euphoria of the exit polling not many hours ago?
I have to say, Mike, that I think a lot of the country is surprised, not just on my side. I think people thought that early trends showed that Kerry was going to win and win decisively, so it is interesting. I'm not ready to concede yet, though.
Well, you know, Kelly Wright just said to both of you that the Kerry camp will have a statement at 10 o'clock. Chris, should he concede at that point at 10 o'clock?
I think so. If you look at the states that are remaining yet to be called, the numbers are in George Bush's favor, and provisional ballots in Ohio, you know, they ought to call those knucklehead ballots. We have them here in Florida also. I spoke to someone yesterday who lives and is registered in Dade County. He got a provisional ballot in Hillsborough County. It's going to get thrown out. I'm sure the same thing's happening in Ohio.
You know,
so it's just mathematically not possible.
Yeah, Chris and Sasha, got to take one of these hard breaks here. Coming right back with both of you just ahead. Also on Fox and Friends, crunching numbers. We'll look at some of the key states that could still decide this election. Coming right back.
And welcome back. It's about 23 minutes past the hour. In our continuing election coverage, here's what's happening with the balance of power in the House. Republicans will maintain their decade-long control there. It looks like the House GOP picked up several seats. One of the lone bright spots for the Democrats, Illinois, where Melissa B. narrowly beat Republican incumbent Phil Crane. Crane represented Chicago's northern suburbs for 35 years and was the longest-serving Republican in the House. Well, down in Texas, Republicans knocked off 4 veteran Democrats with the help of newly redrawn congressional district lines. In the country's most expensive House race, a battle of 2 incumbents, GOP Representative Pete Sessions beat out Democrat Martin Frost. And in Kentucky's 4th District, Republicans also picked up an open Democratic seat. Businessman Jeff Davis beat out Democrat Nick Clooney, the father of actor George Clooney. That's it for right now. Let's go back to Mike.
We still don't know who the next president of the United States is going to be. Not quite sure yet. Back with our pundits, Chris Ingram and Sasha Burns. Welcome to you both again. So what happened to the youth vote? No more youths voted this time around than into the year 2000. There was rock the vote, there was vote or die, and all that kind of stuff. Sasha, what happened?
I'll tell you what, Mike, they better learn. I think we all had high hopes for the youth to turn out. I think that one bright light in this election, well, from my side, I'm sure, Chris, you think there are more than one, is that there was an outpouring and an unprecedented level of interest for the last 40 years. And I think that that's very good for our process. And I think that the young people, when they wake up late today, are going to be very sorry that they didn't get out and vote. And,
I got to tell you, Chris, I mean, those young people, 18 to 29, have so much to gain or lose over the next 4 years. It is surprising, isn't it?
Well, it's a little surprising. Of course, it remains to be seen at what level they did come out. It looks like we had probably about 6 million new voters this year. President Bush has a plan for Social Security reform and allowing individuals to have their own accounts to, benefit their retirement. And I think that that's going to have resonated. Yeah. The Democrats have nothing but the politics of fear to offer to young people, and that certainly is not resonating.
Careful, Chris.
Yeah, let's be kind here on this morning. Sasha and Chris, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Good to see you, Mike.
Okay. Good to be here. Thanks.
All right, so the presidency, as we said, still undecided this morning. Fox News still not calling 4 states, Wisconsin, New Mexico, as well as Iowa, and we're still waiting on Nevada as well. There's the issue, of course, in Ohio of the provisional ballots. Joining me now for a breakdown, independent pollster David Johnson, live in Atlanta. Good to see you early this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, let's talk about exactly exactly what happened with the exit polling. The exit polls, it seems now from our research and from the results, were wildly wrong when it came to over-projecting wins for John Kerry.
They definitely were, and I mean that's some of the Democratic euphoria we saw early on during election day. From what I understand is some of the polling overestimated the voter turnout for females, underestimated male turnout, and also didn't take into consideration as well the strong conservative rural backing that the president was getting up in Ohio, in Iowa, and in other states as well.
One of our viewers writes in and asks this question because of the situation in Ohio with these provisional ballots. That's what we're hearing. The count shows about 100,000 plus votes for President Bush. That state still not being called, though, and Kerry's camp not conceding it because of the issue of provisional ballots. Explain that.
Well, I mean, we have these ballots. They're not the same as absentee ballots. They're provisional ballots that could be rejected. It's someone who goes in and says, you know, this is my polling place, I'm not registered here, and it's up in the air how many of them will be counted, how they'll break, and how many that's really out still.
But why is it an issue right now in Ohio? For example, in Pennsylvania, it looks like John Kerry pulled out a win in Pennsylvania by 120,000 votes. There's no provisional ballot issue in that state?
There are provisional ballots in that state. They're not as stringent as they are in Ohio. In Ohio, they're far more stringent, and in some elections, in previous elections in Ohio, provisional ballots have actually changed the results. In a senatorial campaign in 1970, James Rhodes, who was the governor, actually lost because of provisional ballots.
We talked about the situation of young people coming out to vote, and there was so much talk about the polls that perhaps there would be an undercounting of polls with young people, maybe new people who registered, people with cell phones, not home phones. Turns out that out of the people that voted, we're getting from the Associated Press, under 10% were people between 18 and 25 years old. What happened to all of the young voters that were supposed to come out?
Well, that was the big question, and that was one of the things when Strategic Vision was doing polling. We were trying to estimate, would these voters turn out or not? And their voting history is very weak, and it stayed consistently weak, and this is what we kind of expected most polling companies did.
It stayed the same from the year 2000, at least with the 18 to 25-year-olds who, as Mike was talking about, so much is at stake. Another quick question for you. It's unbelievable when we see the 4 states that Fox News hasn't called yet, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nevada, New Mexico. In New Mexico, it looks like a difference of about 3,600 votes. Is it surprising to you just how close it is in many of these states?
No, it really isn't, because in all the states that we were polling in these battleground states, we were showing basically tied races. I am happy to say that we basically showed Ohio to go to the president about 51 to 49%, and that's basically what the numbers are looking at right now.
David, why are news organizations not calling Nevada for President Bush right now? According to the Associated Press, 100% of the precincts are in, and George Bush is leading by 20,000 votes.
From my understanding is that they're still waiting for some absentee ballots that could tilt the tide. Also, the Kerry campaign has indicated, too, that there might be some votes out there that could put Senator Kerry over. And I think everyone wants to be cautious based on what happened in 2000.
It's harkening back to 2000. We're not going to see months and months. I mean, the most it could be, what, 11 days in Ohio with the provisional ballot situation, or could it spread longer?
It could always spread longer when you have lawyers involved, because they like to prolong things. I mean, I did hear one pundit predict earlier that it could go all the way into the spring before we knew who the president was.
All right, well then we'll keep your number in the file of facts just in case. Hopefully that won't be the case.
I hope not.
Thank you so much, though, for being with us.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it. And still ahead, we talk to South Dakota Senator-elect John Thune. He beat longtime Senator Tom Daschle. We're going to talk about that. Plus, we'll take a legal look at the ballot battle in Ohio. Stay with us. Well, you decided, but we don't know yet.
We don't know about the president. We do know about the state of South Dakota. The Senate's top-ranking Democrat, Tom Daschle from South Dakota, has been voted out of office. Taking his place is newly elected John Thune, and he joins us right now. Congratulations.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning to you. You've been up all night?
Well, I'm sure you have too.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
Yes, we have. Yeah, this is deja vu all over again from 2 years ago, only
That's
with a
for sure.
different outcome, which we appreciate.
With only about 8,700 votes separating your victory from Tom Daschle's defeat. They're calling it the most significant upset in this year's congressional elections. How'd you do it?
Well, you know, I think it was a combination of a good message and a good organization, and we were fortunate. I mean, this was a race that could have gone either way. It was very tight all the way, close even in the last days of the campaign, and I think it came down to who turned out to vote, and that's kind of what we said all along would determine this. And we were fortunate. We had a good organization on the ground, and we were able to get the vote out today and able to eke out a victory, but we were very fortunate to do that. But we're grateful to the people of South Dakota for the opportunity.
And speaking of the people of South Dakota, it is a Republican state by and large, but you seem to send Democrats to Washington. When we talk about this election, especially on a national scale here, and the country still seems to be divided, how are you going to help heal that, help bring everybody together in Washington, D.C. when you end up going there in January?
Well, one of the themes of my campaign, one of the central themes, was that we need to get the Senate functioning and working again, that right now there is too much partisanship, there are too many political games being played, too much obstruction that's keeping the agenda from moving forward. And I think that, you know, getting some new senators in, there were a number of new senators elected this evening, and joining a group that was elected a couple of years ago, and some new leadership, I think we have an opportunity here really to start pushing the positive agenda forward. And I hope that the change in the makeup of the Senate will enable us to get some things done there.
Meantime, back home, I know there were some allegations that perhaps American Indians were that would largely go toward former Senator Daschle were intimidated at the polls. How are you going to heal some of the rifts and accusations that were being thrown around during this hotly contested race?
Well, those were mostly accusations, and I think probably designed more to generate headlines than anything else. I think that we've always got our work to do out here to make sure that that we're reaching out across cultural lines, and I'm going to do everything I can to whatever rift exists to heal that, because we've got important work to do, and the reservations here in South Dakota have important challenges and a lot of problems they need help with, and they need leadership that can work together across party lines, across cultural lines, and in a nation-to-nation relationship with the tribes to make life better for people on the reservations.
Senator-elect Thune, how does that sound, by the way?
Well, it'll take me a while to get used to that. But
you better talk to him after he gets some sleep. It's been a long night.
You have to start calling yourself senator. So tell me about your wife Kimberly and two daughters. How are they feeling? I mean, you never know for sure when you go into that booth that the next morning you're going to be feeling this good. How'd the family hold up?
Well, they did really well. I mean, my family's remarkable. They've been a great part of the campaign. My daughters appeared in a couple of our television commercials and did a super job, and my wife is a real trooper. This is their, I think, 6th campaign in 10 years. I served 3 terms in the House and had a primary election, ran for the Senate race 2 years ago. So they're very durable, and but they're extremely, I think, extremely pleased that it came out this way this year. 2 years ago, we were up until this time of the day and ended up losing a close race. So it's much more fun for them to win than it is to lose.
Certainly. A time to change the business cards, Congressman to Senator.
Have you heard from Senator Daschle?
I have. He was very gracious. We had a nice conversation earlier this morning, and congratulated me and wished me well and offered his assistance.
Yeah. He's not given a concession speech yet, however, correct?
I don't believe he has, no. I think the media out here has called the race, and he made the phone call. I don't think he's done that. I suspect he'll probably say something sometime tomorrow.
Sure.
All right.
Well, sometime today, I guess I should say. Today it is tomorrow.
It feels, yes, absolutely. John Thune, South Dakota Senator-elect, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, we know that race. We don't know who will be the next president of the United States.
Not yet.
But we do know Lauren Green, and she has more information. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, thank you very much, Mike and Kiran. Good morning, everybody. Well, President Bush leads Senator Kerry in Ohio by approximately 131,000 votes. But Ohio Secretary of State says there could be as many as 175,000 provisional ballots outstanding. Provisional ballots are backups for voters whose names do not appear on voter rolls, but who believe they're eligible to vote. Election workers then determine if each provisional ballot cast is legitimate or not. In 2000, there were 100,000 provisional ballots. Of those, 90% were counted. Ohio will count its provisional ballots in 10 days when overseas absentee ballots are also counted. At that point, Ohio's vote will be certified. And now let's go back to Mike and Kiran.
All right, thanks so much, Lauren Green. Meantime, we have not heard yet from either John Kerry or President Bush, as we still do not know the outcome. 4 states still not called: Iowa, Wisconsin, Nevada, and New Mexico. Still up in the air right now, and it looks like the counting is going to resume in some of those states in a couple of hours.
Now, we're getting word that maybe Andy Card may come out and give a little talk here in just a little bit. I bet our Mike Emanuel may have a better take on that. He is at the White House right now. What's going on there, Mike?
Well, good morning once again, Mike and Kiran. It is our understanding that President Bush has gone to bed. That Vice President Cheney was spotted by reporters and was asked if he was going to declare victory. He said no, he's not going to declare victory, that he was going to go back to the residence, go to bed, and eat some breakfast. It is our understanding the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, is going from the White House over to the Reagan building to make a statement to supporters there. The supporters have obviously been waiting to hear from President Bush. It was our understanding that the president was gearing up to declare victory. But at this point, it is our understanding that Andy Card will go over there to address supporters of the president and Vice President Cheney and talk to them about the situation as we understand it. We have a live look of the room there, and let's go to the podium. Can we go to the podium? Oh, that's Ed Gillespie, I'm sorry, the RNC chairman, at the podium right now at the Reagan building. We are waiting for Andy Card, and there he is stepping to the podium. There's the White House Chief of Staff.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for staying up so late with us, and good morning. I'm Andy Card. I'm President Bush's Chief of Staff. We are convinced that President Bush has won re-election with at least 286 Electoral College votes. And he also had a margin of more than 3.5 million popular votes. President Bush's decisive margin of victory makes this the first presidential election since 1988 in which the winner received a majority of the popular vote. And in this election, President Bush received more votes than any presidential candidate in our country's history. Republicans also scored other great victories in this election. We won important victories adding to our majority in the House and adding to our majority in the Senate. In Ohio, President Bush has a lead of at least 140,000 votes. The Secretary of State's office has informed us that this margin is statistically insurmountable, even after the provisional ballots are considered. So President Bush has won the state of Ohio. President Bush has also been declared the winner in Nevada. The other victories that he has had will be added with the strong showing of margins that we are looking at in Iowa and New Mexico, and we're also going to put those states in the winners column as well. This all adds up to a convincing Electoral College victory, as well as a strong endorsement of President Bush by his fellow Americans in the popular vote. President Bush decided to give Senator Kerry the respect of more time to reflect on the results of this election. The President will be making a statement later today. Again, I thank all of you who stayed up these many hours waiting for the opportunity to celebrate this victory. And I also thank all of the volunteers all across this great country that work so hard. But most importantly, I thank the many voters who participated in this important election. It was a great celebration of our democracy. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you.
There you have it. Andrew Card, President Bush's chief of staff, declaring victory, saying that the president won in Ohio and that the president won in Nevada, and that the Secretary of State of Ohio had what to say, Mike?
That they believe that there are 140,000 votes separating the two candidates. George Bush up by 140,000 votes, and he's talked to the Secretary of State and other officials in that state of Ohio, and they're saying that the lead is insurmountable, even if 100% of the provisional ballots went to Senator Kerry.
All right. Meantime, we're getting word that President Bush is probably not going to be speaking, that he's trying to get some rest and not going to talk anytime soon. Vice President Dick Cheney as well saying that he's going to try to get a little bit of sleep and then maybe have some breakfast.
You got it. Kelly Wright is not eating. He's not sleeping. No, he's in Boston at John Kerry headquarters. Kelly, just give us kind of a picture of what happened. The euphoria of those exit polls. Boy, everybody must have been so excited there at Kerry headquarters. And now, I guess you don't have anybody hanging around.
Exactly. I was just going to say that, Mike. If you see what's happening at the Reagan Building down there in Washington, D.C., where the president's campaign has just finished listening to a very upbeat speech from Andy Card, the White House Chief of Staff. If you look around me, there's no one here. That's a clear picture of how this night has gone for John Kerry and John Edwards. John Kerry had hoped to come out here and address some 30,000 people who were his supporters from the Boston and Massachusetts area who had come here to actually hear him speak, win or lose. Well, in essence, what happened, the Kerry camp went from a mood swing of being very happy and lighthearted throughout the day and optimistic about the election results. And then when Ohio took place, that became the key state. The Buckeye state actually bucked the trend of being excited and happy and lighthearted for the Kerry camp. And as a result of that, more of a somber, despondent mood among the Kerry advisors. Some of them saying, we knew this was going to be close, but it's mighty red out there in America. Now, having said that, as I mentioned, the supporters were waiting to hear from John Kerry himself, the hometown guy from Boston here, JFK. They wanted to hear from him no matter what. Instead, John F. Kerry never showed, and he sent out John Edwards, and here's what he had to say.
It's been a long night, but we've waited 4 years for this victory. We can wait one more night. Tonight, John and I are so proud of all of you who are here with us and all of you across the country who have stood with us in this campaign. John Kerry and I made a promise to the American people that in this election, every vote would count and every vote would be counted. Tonight, we are keeping our word, and we will fight for every vote. You deserve no less. Thank you.
So you can see from John Edwards that it is not a concession speech at all, but a speech of saying they're going to fight for every vote that counts. And as a result, we will wait to hear from the Kerry camp sometime. We expect around 10 o'clock. John Kerry's a windsurfer, but the wind has been taken out of his sails so far. Back to you guys.
All right.
Kel, thanks a lot.
Kelly, thanks. And
want to go to Florida?
Absolutely. Orlando Salinas is live in West Palm Beach, Florida, and he's going to bring us the latest on the presidential race down there. Well, we know it's been called for President Bush, and boy, a lot more organized than in 2000, to say the least.
You got it exactly right, Kiran. Good to see you and Mike this morning. I've got less than 2 minutes to tell you this story, so let's get to it. Look, as far as Florida is concerned, this place was not the election meltdown, did not have the voting machine meltdown that everybody was talking about. Political experts say, you know, one big reason why is because in this state, it appears right now that indeed President Bush won this time by as many as 300,000 votes, not the 537 votes of 2000. Let's show you some of that video. We're talking about the voting itself. The polls, really from the moment that they opened, busy across the state. As many as 10 million Floridians expected to cast ballots. In Miami-Dade and Broward counties, both heavily Democrat strongholds. Some complaints about voting machine problems, complaints about long lines in Miami-Dade and Broward and Palm Beach County. Now, Senator Kerry beat out President Bush in those three counties, but in that all-important I-4 corridor from Tampa, St. Pete to Daytona Beach, the majority of those 700,000 undecided, I will make up my mind at the last-minute voters, a good chunk of those went for President Bush in greater numbers. Now, here in Palm Beach County, home of that butterfly ballot of 2000, the new wrinkles seem to be the more than 100,000 absentee ballots. As many as 70,000 have yet to be counted. There will be, as we understand, hundreds apparently have been disqualified already because there was no signature on that ballot. In the hot race to fill the U.S. Senate seat left vacant by retiring Senator Bob Graham, Democrat Betty Castor appears right now to be behind just barely by 1 percentage point. Bring it on back out live here now. As we understand it, by Thursday, that is the deadline for all of these ballots, everything to be unofficially returned, the unofficial returns to be sent to Tallahassee. Guys, back to you.
Did it in 2 minutes. Nicely done.
Sure did.
Got it in there. Voting dilemmas across the country. We'll take a look at some of the cases that are still up in the air and maybe headed to the courts when we come right back. Will this still undecided, and I do mean undecided, we still don't know who the President of the United States is going to be. Will this whole thing end up in the courts again?
President Bush right now 1 electoral vote away from most projections of winning the White House. Today to talk about it right now, constitutional attorney and Fox News legal analyst Lee Sweal. Great to see you with us. And from Columbus, Ohio, election law expert Terry Enns. She's an adjunct professor, law professor at Ohio State University's Election Law Center. Thanks so much for being with us as well, Terry. Let me direct the first question at you then. You're there in Ohio. Explain the provisional ballot situation.
The provisional ballot situation in Ohio is, we've had provisional ballots for one purpose for quite some time, but now with the Help America Vote Act, we have a whole new layer of provisional ballots. And the question today is whether there will be enough provisional ballots that are valid that could possibly tip the numbers one way or the other.
Now, in Ohio, though, Lisa, they've had this before the election in 2000 even. Do you know why they wait 10 days?
Because that's how long it takes for all the votes to both come in and be counted. But I think what's important here is this is new. We've got new laws that we're going down new territory here, and the provisional ballots could be the old Dimples and Chads of 2000, you know, deja vu all over again. But I agree in that the sense it's got to be mathematically possible for one candidate to win when those provisional ballots are counted over the other. I mean, there's got to be a change. Otherwise, you know, even if you tally up all the votes for Kerry and they would all come down for Kerry, but mathematically he couldn't win, you know, does it make sense for him to go
forward? Are we at that point, though, now? Do we?
I don't think so.
We know that
we
for
don't
sure
because
right
we don't know how many provisional ballots there are.
Mary Beth Cahill in the Kerry camp is saying it could be as many as 250,000 uncounted votes. The Bush camp much lower. But you know, this is the thing that I want to ask Terry about as well. The federal law that was passed by Congress in 2002 requires that every person who comes to vote who is not on a registration list be given this provisional ballot. Okay, and the legitimacy of that provisional ballot is determined after the race. So Terry, tell us, what are some of the criteria? What would disqualify a ballot?
Well, that's actually one of the questions that we have right now. One of the issues is that those new provisional ballots, the Help America Vote Act provisional ballots, we don't have real clear standards on what's what will cause them to be counted or not be counted. For instance, if you filled out the affidavit on the front of the ballot and said, this is who I am and this is where I reside and I'm voting in the correct precinct, are you required to do more than provide that affidavit? Is your signature saying I'm telling the truth enough? We don't have clear standards on that yet.
And the problem with that, not having the clear standards, is that we're down then to, in the precincts, the people actually counting, looking over, seeing if the signatures look to be forged or not. I mean, it's left up to a person by person, an individual by individual to make these decisions. If that then is taken the next step, we're in a court situation where, for example, the Democrats would try to get people together who would say, look, I went to the polls and I was harassed by the poll watchers and forced to, to sign one of these provisional ballots. I should never have even been put in that position. Look for that kind of case.
Okay, and it says that the provisional ballots are only counted when the margin of victory is smaller than the number of provisional ballots cast. So we not have that answer yet
we need to know how many ballots we have. Exactly.
All right, so a lot going on. It's almost 6 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, and we still do not know who is President of the United States today.
Terry Ann's, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Perfect guest at this hour.
And Lise Wheel, as always, thank you as well.
Okay. Just ahead on Fox and Friends, the presidential election has come and gone. Not quite. There's still no winner yet. We have the election at 269 electoral votes and counting.
270 needed to win, so we're going to be live in the key states for breaking results. 4 states still up in the air right now from Fox News, and we're going to bring you more information on that. Plus, how did the Sunshine State handle this election? Far from what happened in 2000. We're going to talk to Florida Congressman Mark Foley coming up.
Stay tuned. The A-Team's coming in just a second. Stephen Bryan.